Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Silas Gravesend, and I've been a park ranger in the Cherokee National Forest for 14 years. Before that, I spent 8 years as a funeral director back in Knoxville. I know that sounds like a strange career change, but after preparing hundreds of bodies for burial, I needed to be around life instead of death. These mountains gave me peace, or at least they did until December of 1984. I was stationed at the Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest, one of the last places in Tennessee where you can still find trees older than America itself. Some of those tulip poplars have been growing for 400 years, tall as skyscrapers and thick as truck beds. When you walk among them, you feel small in a good way. Like your problems don't matter much in the grand scheme of things. My grandmother on my mother's side was Cherokee, and she taught me that these old forests were sacred places. The trees remember everything, she used to say. They hold the stories of all who lived and died beneath them. Back then, I thought she was just being poetic. Now I know better. The trouble started on December 15th, during the worst ice storm we'd seen in years. The temperature had dropped to 20 below, and snow was falling so thick you couldn't see 10 feet ahead. I was alone at the research station, a small cabin deep in the memorial forest where I tracked wildlife patterns and monitored the health of the old trees. I should mention that I wasn't a typical ranger. My background in funeral work meant I handled all the wildlife mortality reports for our district. When animals died in the forest, I documented the causes: disease, predators, old age, weather. It was grim work, but someone had to do it, and I'd seen enough death to handle it without getting upset. That morning, I found the first circle. 12 deer, all dead, arranged in a perfect ring around a small clearing I'd never noticed before. They weren't torn apart by predators or obviously sick. They just lay there in the snow like they'd all decided to lie down and die at exactly the same time. In the center of the circle, barely visible under the snow, was a weathered stone marker. I brushed it clean and found a name carved in old-fashioned letters. Mary Hoskins, age 7, gone to God, 1918. The hair on my neck stood up, not because of the grave. Old pioneer cemeteries were scattered all through these mountains, but because of how the deer had died. In my 8 years preparing bodies, I'd seen every kind of death you can imagine. These deer looked like they'd died of the same thing. Their mouths were open, like they'd been trying to breathe, and their eyes had that glassy look I recognized from flu victims back in my funeral home days. But deer don't die of the flu, and they sure don't arrange themselves in perfect circles to do it. I radioed back to headquarters, but all I got was static mixed with something that sounded almost like crying. Must have been interference from the ice storm, I told myself. I'd document this in the morning and hike out when the weather cleared. That's when I found the second circle. This one had 15 raccoons, all dead the same way. And in the center, another old grave marker. James Hoskins, age 34, beloved father, 1918. Then a third circle. 9 possums around Sarah Hoskins, age 2, our little angel, 1918. By the time I found the fourth circle, my hands were shaking, and it wasn't from the cold. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't natural. In 14 years of wildlife management, I'd never seen anything like it. The sun was setting, and the temperature was dropping fast. I needed to get back to the research station before I froze to death myself. But as I turned to leave, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Singing. A woman's voice, thin and far away, singing what sounded like a lullaby. But there was no one else out here. No one could have made it through this storm. I followed the sound deeper into the grove, my flashlight beam dancing across the massive tree trunks. The singing got clearer as I walked, and I realized what I was hearing. It was In the Sweet By and By, an old hymn they used to sing at funerals when I was in the business. The singing stopped just as I reached a clearing I'd never seen before, despite hiking these trails for years. It was perfectly circular, maybe 50 feet across, surrounded by the biggest tulip poplars in the forest. And scattered across the clearing, barely visible under the snow, were dozens of small stone markers. I knelt down and brushed the snow off the nearest one. Thomas Wright, age 12, 1918. Then another. Helen Wright, age 36, 1918. And another. Baby Wright, 3 days old, 1918. 1918. The year of the Spanish flu pandemic. The year that killed more people than World War I. I stood up slowly, my breath forming clouds in the freezing air, and realized I was standing in the middle of a mass grave. All these families, all these people, had died in the same terrible year and been buried together in this hidden place. And somehow, they were still here. I should have left right then. Should have hiked back to the research station, packed my gear, and gotten out of those mountains as fast as my legs could carry me. But I'm stubborn, and my grandmother always said the dead deserved respect. If these people had been forgotten, buried in some hidden place where no one ever visited their graves, then maybe they needed someone to acknowledge them. That was my first mistake. I spent the rest of the evening back at the station trying to make sense of what I'd found. The radio was still filled with static, but now I could swear I heard voices in it. Whispered conversations, children crying, someone coughing like their lungs were full of fluid. I tried to tell myself it was just the storm playing tricks with the radio waves. Ice. Storms can do strange things to electronic equipment, but deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. I pulled out my maps and research materials looking for any record of a cemetery in that part of the forest. Nothing. The Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest had been extensively surveyed when it became protected land, and there was no mention of any burial ground. But I did find something else. In a 1920 newspaper from Murphy, North Carolina, there was a small article about the flu pandemic's impact on the mountain communities. Remote settlements hit hardest, the headline read. Entire families found dead in their homes. Emergency mass burials conducted in undisclosed locations to prevent further spread of disease. Mass burials in undisclosed locations. I was starting to understand what I'd stumbled into. The next morning, the storm had eased up enough for me to venture out again. I told myself I was just doing my job, documenting the wildlife mortality event. But really, I couldn't stop thinking about those graves. About all those people who had died alone and afraid, buried without proper funeral rites because everyone was too scared of the disease to give them a decent burial. In my years as a funeral director, I'd learned that how people are buried matters, not just to the living, but somehow to the dead as well. When families couldn't afford a proper service, or when someone died alone with no one to claim them, there was always something unsettled about the whole thing. Like the person couldn't quite let go. I hiked back to the hidden cemetery, this time bringing my camera and notebook to document everything properly. In the daylight, I could see that there were more graves than I'd realized the night before. Maybe 60 or 70 stone markers, most of them so weathered I could barely make out the names. But what really got my attention were the trees. The tulip poplars around the cemetery were different from the others in the forest. Their bark was darker, almost black, and their branches twisted in ways that didn't look natural. Some of them had grown right through the grave sites, their roots wrapped around the old headstones like fingers clutching at something. And they were cold. Not just winter cold, but cold like a morgue. Cold like the embalming room where I used to work. I was photographing one of the headstones when I heard footsteps in the snow behind me. I turned around expecting to see another ranger or maybe a lost hiker, but there was no one there, just my own tracks leading into the cemetery. But there was a second set of footprints now, right beside mine, small ones, like they'd been made by a child. I followed them with my eyes, and they led straight to a tiny grave marker that read, Lucy Mae Hoskins, age 5, taken by the Lord, 1918. The footprints ended at the grave, but there was no one there. That's when I heard the coughing. It started soft, like someone trying to muffle it, but it got worse quickly. Wet, harsh coughing that sounded like someone drowning from the inside. The kind of cough I remembered from the worst flu cases back when I was preparing bodies during the bad winters. The sound was coming from all around me. From the trees, from the graves, from the air itself. I grabbed my camera and started backing toward the edge of the cemetery, but the coughing followed me. It got louder and more desperate, like dozens of people all trying to breathe at the same time and failing. Then I saw her. She was standing beside the largest tulip poplar, maybe 30 feet away. A little girl in a white nightgown, her hair long and dark, her skin pale as snow. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, but she was see-through, like looking at someone through frosted glass. She was coughing, her small body shaking with each harsh breath. When she looked up at me, her eyes were fever-bright and desperate. She opened her mouth like she was trying to say something, but all that came out was more coughing. I stood there frozen, my camera hanging uselessly in my hands. In all my years preparing bodies, in all my time in these mountains, I had never seen anything like this. The little girl took a step toward me, then another. With each step, she became more solid, more real. I could see the sickness in her face now, the flush of fever on her cheeks, the way her nightgown was soaked with sweat. "Mister," she whispered, her voice barely audible over her coughing. "Mister, we can't breathe." That's when the others started appearing. One by one, they stepped out from behind the trees or rose up from the graves themselves. Men, women, children, babies, all of them pale and sick-looking, all of them coughing and gasping like they were drowning in their own lungs. I counted at least 20 of them, but more kept appearing. They were all around me now, forming a circle just like the dead animals had done. But instead of lying down, they were standing, swaying slightly like people with high fevers. "We can't rest," said a woman holding a baby that was barely more than a shadow. "They buried us wrong. They buried us scared." "No prayers," said an old man, his voice like wind through dry leaves. "No songs. No one to see us home." "Please," said the little girl, reaching out to me with one translucent hand. "Please help us breathe." I wanted to run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of that cemetery as fast as I could. But I'd spent too many years with the dead to be afraid of them. These weren't monsters or demons. They were just people who had died badly and been buried worse. "What do you need?" I heard myself ask. The little girl smiled, and for just a moment, she looked alive again. "A proper goodbye," she whispered. The words we never got to hear. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. The dead never make things easy. I hiked back to the research station with my head spinning, trying to figure out what I'd gotten myself into. These people had been dead for 66 years, but somehow they were still here, still suffering from the flu that killed them, still waiting for someone to give them a proper burial. The problem was, I didn't know how to do that. I'd been a funeral director, sure, but I'd never dealt with ghosts before. And these weren't just any ghosts. These were people who had died during one of the worst pandemics in history, buried in mass graves without ceremony because everyone was too scared to get near them. I tried the radio again, hoping to reach headquarters and maybe get some backup. But instead of static, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a church service, an old-fashioned funeral service, with a preacher speaking about dust returning to dust and a choir singing hymns in harmony. But when I listened closer, I realized the voices were the same ones I'd heard in the cemetery. The dead were conducting their own funeral, the one they'd never been given. That's when I knew I was in real trouble. I spent the rest of the day researching Cherokee burial traditions. My grandmother had taught me some of the old ways, but I'd never paid close attention. Now I wished I had. According to what I could remember, the Cherokee believed that people who died badly or were buried improperly could become stuck between worlds, unable to move on to the nightland where spirits were supposed to go. The cemetery I'd found was on Cherokee land, sacred ground where the dead should have been honored according to tribal customs. But the white settlers who died there had been buried Christian style, and even that had been done wrong. No wonder they couldn't rest. As night fell, I heard them coming. It started with singing, the same hymns I'd heard on the radio. But this time, the voices were coming from outside the station. I looked out the window and saw lights moving through the trees. Not electric lights, but the soft glow of candles or oil lamps. They were Haint, a funeral procession. I watched from the window as dozens of translucent figures walked slowly through the forest, carrying phantom candles and singing in voices that sounded like wind through empty houses. They moved in a long line between the trees, heading toward the hidden cemetery. At the front of the procession was a man in a black suit carrying what looked like a Bible. Behind him came families walking together, parents holding the hands of children who flickered in and out of sight like candle flames in a breeze. And at the very end, walking alone, was the little girl I'd met earlier. She turned and looked right at me through the window, her fever-bright eyes pleading. I knew what she wanted. They all wanted the same thing, someone living to witness their funeral, to speak the words that would let them go home. Before I could lose my nerve, I put on my coat and walked outside. The cold hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't natural cold. It was the cold of the grave, the cold of the morgue, the cold of death itself. My breath came out in great white clouds, and ice crystals formed on my beard within seconds. But I kept walking, following the procession deeper into the forest. They led me back to the hidden cemetery, where I found something that hadn't been there before. In the center of the clearing, surrounded by all those weathered headstones, someone had built a church. Not a real church. It was made of shadows and moonlight and memories, but I could see it clearly. Wooden pews, a simple altar, windows that showed not the forest outside but some other place entirely. Somewhere warm and bright, where the dead could finally rest. The ghost congregation filed into the shadow church and took their seats. Families sat together, children on their parents' laps, babies cradled in arms that were barely there. They all looked at me, expectantly. The man in the black suit, I realize now he must have been the town preacher who died along with everyone else, gestured for me to come forward. "You know the words," he said, his voice echoing, strangely in the impossible space. "You've said them before." He was right. In my years as a funeral director, I'd worked with dozens of ministers, had heard the burial service so many times I knew it by heart. But I'd never given one myself. "I'm not ordained," I said. "I'm not a preacher." "Neither was I," the ghost preacher replied. "I was a school teacher who read Bible verses on Sundays because we were too poor for a real minister. But when the flu came, I did what needed doing, same as you." I looked out at the congregation of the dead, all of them watching me with hope in their translucent faces. These people had died alone and afraid, buried without dignity or ceremony. The least I could do was give them the words they'd been waiting 66 years to hear. I stepped up to the shadow altar and opened my mouth to speak, but before I could say a word, something went wrong. The temperature plummeted even further, and the soft light from the phantom church began to flicker. The dead in the pews started coughing again, harder than before, like their spectral lungs were filling up with fluid. "Too late," whispered the little girl, Lucy May. She was standing in the front pew now, her nightgown stained with something dark. "Too late, too late. They're coming for us." "Who's coming?" I asked, but even as I said it, I could hear them. Footsteps, heavy boots marching through the forest, getting closer, and voices, harsh, frightened voices shouting orders. "Burn it all," someone yelled. "Don't let it spread. Burn the bodies, burn the houses, burn everything." The ghost congregation started to panic. They flickered more violently, becoming less solid, more transparent. Some of them were starting to fade away entirely. "They came for us before," the preacher explained, his voice getting fainter. "After we died. Men with masks and torches. They were so afraid of the sickness, so they wouldn't even let us rest in peace." Now I understood. These people hadn't just died of the flu. They'd been disturbed after death, their bodies burned or scattered by people too terrified of the disease to show proper respect for the dead. And somehow, those same men were coming back. The phantom church began to collapse around us as the sound of boots got closer. The dead were disappearing one by one, pulled back into whatever horrible place they'd been trapped in for all these years. "Help us!" Lucy May reached out to me as she started to fade. Don't let them take us again. But I didn't know how to help. I wasn't a minister or a shaman or anything special. I was just a park ranger who used to prepare bodies for burial. Then I remembered what my grandmother had taught me about Cherokee traditions, about how the living and dead were connected, how the proper ceremonies could help spirits find their way home. I might not be able to stop what had happened 66 years ago, but maybe I could finish what those scared, desperate men had prevented. The phantom men with torches burst into the cemetery just as the last of the ghost congregation was fading away. But these weren't real people. They were echoes, memories of the terrified living who had refused to let the dead rest in peace. I could see them clearly now. Men in long coats with cloth masks over their faces, carrying kerosene torches and shovels. They moved through the cemetery like a destructive storm, kicking over headstones and setting fire to everything they could reach. "Burn it all!" their leader shouted, his voice muffled by the mask. "Can't have the sickness spreading. These people are better off burned." But the fires they set weren't real fires. They were cold flames that gave off no heat, only a terrible blue-white light that made everything look like it was underwater, and wherever the caves I touched, the spirits of the dead screamed and writhed in agony. Lucy May appeared beside me, grabbing my hand with fingers that felt like ice water. "They keep coming back," she whispered, tears streaming down her fever-bright face. "Every time we try to rest, they come back and burn us again. Make it stop, mister. Please make it stop." I looked around the cemetery and finally understood what had really happened here. These people hadn't just died of the flu. They'd been murdered twice, first by disease, then by fear. The Spanish flu pandemic had been the deadliest plague in human history. Entire families had died within days of each other, and the survivors had been so terrified that the sickness would spread from the bodies that they'd done terrible things, things that haunted them for the rest of their lives. But the dead remembered, and they couldn't forgive what had been done to them. "You want to rest?" I said to Lucy May, my voice getting stronger. "Then let me finish what should have been done 66 years ago." I stepped into the center of the cemetery, right where the phantom flames were burning coldest. The ghost with the torch turned to face me, and I could see hatred and fear burning in his eyes. "Get back," he snarled. "These people are diseased. They'll kill us all." "No," I said firmly. "You're wrong. And you're dead. Same as them. You've been dead for decades, and you don't even know it." The ghost looked confused, and his torch flickered. That's when I realized the truth. The men who had destroyed this cemetery hadn't been monsters. They'd been ordinary people driven to terrible acts by their own terror. And that terror had trapped them here just as surely as it had trapped their victims. "Listen to me," I said, addressing both the living and the dead. "All of you. I've spent my whole adult life dealing with death, and I know this. Everyone deserves dignity when they die. Everyone deserves to be remembered with love, not fear." I turned to where Lucy May and the other spirits were cowering behind the headstones. "Your names were T. Thomas Wright, Helen Wright, Baby Wright," I began, reading from the weathered markers. "Mary Hoskins, James Hoskins, Sarah Hoskins, Lucy May Hoskins. You were not just victims of a disease. You were people. You had families. You had lives that mattered." As I spoke their names, the spirits became more solid, more real. The phantom flames began to dim. You died afraid and in pain, and you were buried without the respect you deserved. But you are not forgotten. I see you. I acknowledge you. And I release you from this place. I reached into my coat and pulled out a small leather pouch my grandmother had given me years ago. It contained sacred tobacco and sage, blessed according to Cherokee tradition. I'd never used them before, but somehow I knew what to do. By the old ways and the new ways, by Cherokee tradition and Christian custom, I commit your spirits to the eternal rest that was stolen from you. Go in peace to the nightland, where there is no sickness and no fear. I scattered the blessed tobacco over the graves, and immediately the temperature began to rise. The cold flames sputtered and died, and the phantom men with their torches started to fade away. But their leader wasn't giving up easily. "You don't understand," he screamed, lunging at me with his torch. "They'll spread the sickness. They'll kill everyone." The torch passed right through me, but I could feel its cold burning along my ribs. This ghost was stronger than the others, held here by decades of guilt and terror. "What's your name?" I asked him. He stopped, surprised by the question. I was Dr. Marcus Webb. I was trying to save people. I had to stop the disease from spreading." "Dr. Webb," I said gently, "the pandemic is over. It ended in 1920, almost 65 years ago. The people you were afraid of, the people you thought you had to stop, they've been dead longer than most people alive to. Odi have been living. There's nothing left to be afraid of." The ghost doctor looked around the cemetery with new eyes, seeing it as it really was, not a source of infection, but a place where frightened, sick people had been laid to rest. "I was so scared," he whispered. "So many people were dying. I thought if we just burned the bodies, burned everything they'd touched." "You were trying to protect people," I said, "but you went too far. And now you're trapped here by your own guilt, just like they were trapped by your fear." Dr. Webb's torch finally went out completely. He looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time in decades. "Can you forgive me?" he asked, not looking at me, but at the spirits of the people he'd wronged. Lucy May stepped forward and took the ghost doctor's hand in both of hers. "You were scared too," she said simply. "We were all scared. But we don't have to be scared anymore." That's when the miracle happened. The shadow church reappeared, but this time it was brighter, warmer, more solid. The dead congregation filed back in, but now they included Dr. Webb and the other men who had burned the cemetery. They all sat together, victims and perpetrators, living and dead, Cherokee and white, united finally in their need for peace. I stood at the altar and spoke the words that should have been said 66 years ago. I gave them the funeral they'd all been waiting for, the ceremony that honored their lives and released their spirits from the pain that had bound them to this place. As I spoke, they began to fade, not in fear or anger, but in peace. One by one, they became translucent, then transparent, then simply gone. Lucy May was the last to leave. She stood in front of me for a long moment, no longer sick, no longer afraid. She looked like any normal little girl except for the way light seemed to shine through her. "Thank you, mister," she said, "for remembering our names." Then she too was gone, and I was alone in the forest with nothing but weathered headstones and the sound of wind through ancient trees. An ice storm ended the next morning, and by afternoon, a Cherokee Nation cultural specialist named Joseph Sixkiller had hiked in to meet me. I'd finally gotten through on the radio and asked for help documenting what I'd found. Joseph was a quiet man in his 60s, with traditional tattoos on his forearms and eyes that had seen more than most people would believe. When I showed him the hidden cemetery, he nodded like he'd been expecting something like this. "Grandmother Moon told us this place was troubled," he said, kneeling beside one of the headstones. "But we didn't know why. Now we do." "You believe what I told you?" I asked. "About the spirits?" Joseph looked at me with something between amusement and pity. "Son, I've been dealing with restless dead for 40 years. What you did here, speaking their names, honoring their passing, that was good medicine. Cherokee and Christian both." He spent the rest of the day performing additional ceremonies, blessing the ground according to traditional customs, and ensuring that any lingering spirits would find peace. When he was finished, the cemetery felt different, lighter, like a great weight had been lifted from the earth itself. "They're gone now," he said as we hiked back toward the research station. "Gone where they should have gone in 1918, but this place will always be sacred. The trees remember what happened here." Over the following months, the Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest was expanded to include the hidden cemetery. The graves were properly marked and maintained, and a small monument was erected to honor the victims of the 1918 flu pandemic who had been denied dignity and death. I stayed on as a ranger for 3 more years, but something had changed in me. The experience with Lucy May and the other spirits had awakened something my grandmother had tried to teach me years ago, that the living and the dead are more connected than most people realize. Eventually, I left the Park Service and went back to funeral work, but with a difference. I specialized in cases where people had died alone or been forgotten by their families. I made sure they got proper services, that their names were spoken with respect, that someone witnessed their passing from this world to whatever comes next. I also worked with Cherokee communities throughout North Carolina and Tennessee, helping them reclaim and properly bless burial grounds that had been disturbed or forgotten. It was important work, the kind that helped both the living and the dead find peace. But sometimes, late at night when the wind is blowing through the mountains, I still think about that winter in the Joyce Kilmer Forest, about Lucy May and Dr. Webb and all the others who had been trapped by fear and pain for so many years. I think about how easy it would have been to just walk away, to pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. But the dead deserve better than that. They deserve to be remembered, to have their stories told, to know that their lives mattered. That's why I'm telling you this story now, because somewhere out there, in forgotten corners of old forests and abandoned settlements, there are other restless spirits waiting for someone to speak their names, waiting for someone to give them the dignity that was denied to them in life. The dead don't lie, and they don't forget. But with the right words, the right ceremonies, the right respect, they can finally forgive. And when they do, they can go home at last. If you ever find yourself in the Cherokee National Forest, in the Joyce Kilmer Memorial Grove, look for the small cemetery with its weathered headstones and ancient trees. Read the names carved in stone. Remember that these were real people who lived and died and deserved better than they got. And if you happen to hear singing on the wind or catch a glimpse of candlelight between the trees, don't be afraid. It's just the dead, finally at peace, reminding us that love is stronger than fear, and that everyone deserves to be remembered with dignity. The trees remember. And now, so do you. My name is Ezra Hawthorne, and my family's walked these ridges since before there was a Park Service to tell us we couldn't. For 13 years now, I've been a ranger here in Shenandoah, same mountains my great-granddaddy knew like the back of his weathered hands. Fire suppression and prevention, that's my specialty. I can spot a smoke plume from 20 miles away and tell you if it's going to be trouble or just someone's weekend campfire. August of 1973 was different, though. Heat like I'd never seen, even growing up in these Blue Ridge Mountains. Thermometer hit 100 degrees for 6 straight days, and the whole mountain felt like it was holding its breath. Leaves hung limp as wet rags, and even the streams that never ran dry were down to muddy trickles. Everything was bone dry and ready to burn. I was up at the fire lookout on Stony Man Mountain that Tuesday morning when the call came in. Static crackled through my Bendix King radio like angry wasps. "Hawthorne, you there?" It was dispatch, sounding tired already, and it wasn't even 9 o'clock. "Copy, dispatch. Go ahead." "Got a report from farmer named Jenkins about a mile south of Skyline Drive. Says something killed 3 of his sheep last night. Wants a ranger to take a look." I sighed and reached for my topographic maps. Livestock kills were usually pretty straightforward. Black bear or maybe a wild dog pack. "Copy that. I'll head over and take a look." "Hawthorne?" The dispatcher's voice had a funny edge to it. "Jenkins says it wasn't like any animal attack he's ever seen. Been farming up there 40 years. That should have been my first warning, but I'd heard it all before. Every farmer thinks their livestock got killed by something special. Usually turns out to be a bear or coyote, maybe a feral dog. City folks move to the mountains and suddenly every raccoon becomes Bigfoot. The drive down to Jenkins' place took me along the ridge road where my family used to hunt before the Park Service bought up all the land. Daddy used to tell stories about the old days, when Cherokee still lived in these mountains. He'd mentioned something called the Beast of Blue Ridge, some kind of creature that walked like a man but hunted like a cat. I always figured it was just panther tails grown tall over the years. Jenkins was waiting for me by his barn, hat in his hands and sweat stains dark under his arms despite the early hour. He was a small man with big hands, the kind who'd worked hard his whole life and had the bent back to prove it. "Thank God you're here, Ranger Hawthorne," he said, leading me around behind his barn. "I've been farming these hills since I was 16, and I ain't never seen nothing like this." The sheep were still there, where he'd found them that morning. 3 ewes, all dead, all torn up bad. But it wasn't the killing that made my stomach turn. It was how they'd been arranged. Someone or something had dragged them into a perfect triangle, heads pointing toward the center like spokes on a wheel. "Bears don't do this," Jenkins said, voice shaky. "And look at them claw marks." He pointed to gouges in the oak tree beside the barn. 6 parallel lines, each about 6 inches long, carved deep into the bark about 8 feet off the ground. No bear I knew could reach that high, and no bear had claws that long. "Could be a big cat," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. "Mountain lion, maybe." Jenkins shook his head. "Ain't been a painter in these mountains for 50 years, and you know it. Besides, look at the tracks." He led me to a muddy patch near his water trough. The prints were clear in the dried mud, and they made my skin crawl. They started out looking almost human. 5 toes, about the size of a man's foot, but with long claw marks at the tips. Then, about 10 feet away, they changed. Same creature, but now walking on all 4s like some kind of animal. "What walks on 2 legs and then drops to 4? Jenkins asked. I didn't have an answer for that. I took photos with my 35mm camera and measured the tracks with my ranger's tape. Made notes about the claw marks and the way the sheep had been arranged. All standard procedure, but nothing about this felt standard. "You keep your livestock close to the barn for a while," I told Jenkins, "and if you see or hear anything strange, you call the ranger station right away." Driving back up the mountain, I kept thinking about those tracks. In 13 years of rangering, I'd seen bear kills and coyote kills and even one mountain lion attack down near Front Royal. None of them looked like what I'd seen at Jenkins' place. The radio crackled again as I reached the fire lookout. "Hawthorne, we got another call. Mrs. Patterson up on Mill Creek Road says something killed her dog last night." I closed my eyes and felt the heat pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. "On my way," I said. Mrs. Patterson's place was 5 miles north of Jenkins' farm, up a winding dirt road that hadn't seen fresh gravel in years. She met me at her porch, a gray-haired woman in a faded house dress who looked like she hadn't slept. "It's behind the woodshed," she said, not wanting to walk back there herself. "Poor Buster. Had him 12 years. Buster had been a big German shepherd, the kind of dog that could handle himself against most anything, but something had torn him apart like he was made of paper. Same claw marks, same impossible reach on the nearby trees. And the smell, Lord, the smell was like nothing I'd ever encountered. Part wet animal, part something else. Something that made my nose burn and my eyes water. "Did you hear anything last night?" I asked Mrs. Patterson. "Heard Buster barking around midnight, then he stopped real sudden-like." She wrapped her arms around herself despite the heat. "Then I heard this sound, like screaming. But not human, not animal either. Something in between." I took more photos and measurements. The tracks were the same, starting human, changing to animal. But there was something else this time. Long scratches in the dirt that looked almost like symbols, though I couldn't make sense of them. By the time I got back to the ranger station, word had spread. Game Warden Pete Morrison was waiting for me, hat pushed back on his graying head and a worried look in his eyes. "Heard you had some strange animal kills today," he said. "Mind if I take a look at those photos?" Pete had been working these mountains longer than I'd been alive. If anyone would know what we were dealing with, it'd be him. I spread the photos out on my desk and watched his face change as he looked them over. "Jesus, Ezra, what the hell is this thing?" "Was hoping you could tell me." He picked up the photo of the claw marks on Jenkins' oak tree. "I've seen bear claws, mountain lion claws, even wolverine claws up in Canada. This ain't like any of them. And the reach?" He shook his head. "Nothing around here could make marks that high." "What about the tracks?" Pete studied the photos of the changing footprints. "It's like something that could choose to walk upright or on all 4s, but that's impossible. Tell that to the dead animals. We decided to patrol together that night, Pete bringing his tracking hounds and me bringing my rifle and emergency radio. The sun was setting behind the mountains when we parked at the end of Mill Creek Road and started walking into the woods. The mountains felt wrong that evening. Usually you'd hear birds settling down for the night, maybe an owl calling or a whippoorwill starting up. But there was nothing. Complete silence, like the whole mountain was holding its breath. Pete's hounds were acting strange too. Rex and Blue were seasoned tracking dogs who'd never backed down from a bear trail. But tonight they stayed, D close to Pete's legs, whining low in their throats. "They smell something," Pete whispered. "Something they don't like." We followed an old deer trail up toward the ridge, flashlights, cutting through the growing darkness. The air was still thick and hot, no breeze to cool the sweat on our faces. Every step seemed too loud, every broken twig like a gunshot. That's when we found the second set of kills. 3 deer, all bucks, arranged in the same triangle pattern as Jenkins's sheep. But these had been up here longer, maybe a week or more. The smell was terrible, but underneath it was that same burning odor I'd noticed at Mrs. Patterson's. "Look at this," Pete said, shining his light on a nearby tree. More claw marks, but these were fresh. 6 parallel gouges in the bark, and they were still weeping sap. Whatever made them had been here recently. The hounds suddenly went crazy, barking and straining at their leashes. Pete had to fight to hold them as they tried to pull him back toward the trail. "What is it, boys?" he said. "What do you smell?" Then we heard it. A sound like Mrs. Patterson had described, part scream, part roar, but not quite either one. It came from somewhere up the ridge, echoing off the rock faces like a voice from hell itself. The hounds went quiet immediately, pressing against Pete's legs and shaking. "We should go," Pete whispered. "Whatever that is, it knows we're here." But as we turned to head back down the trail, my flashlight caught something that made my blood freeze. 2 yellow eyes, glowing like hot coals, watching us from a rock ledge 30 feet above our heads. No animal could have climbed up there. The cliff face was sheer granite. The eyes blinked once, then disappeared. We ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. 2 grown men, both armed, both with years of experience in these mountains, and we ran like scared children. The hounds didn't need any encouragement. They pulled Pete down the trail so fast he could barely keep his feet. Behind us, something howled again, closer this time. We didn't stop running until we wrecked Head Pete's truck. "What the hell was that thing?" Pete gasped, hands shaking as he loaded his dogs into the back. I didn't have an answer, but I was starting to think those old stories my daddy told weren't just tall tales after all. The next morning brought news that made my stomach drop. A family from Richmond, the Hendersons, had been camping illegally in the backcountry. Their car was found abandoned at a trailhead with all their gear still inside, but there was no sign of the family anywhere. Sheriff's Department was calling it a missing persons case, but I knew better. I'd seen those tracks, smelled that burning smell, looked into those yellow eyes. The Hendersons weren't missing. They were dead. Pete came back to the ranger station around noon, looking like he hadn't slept. His hounds were still so spooked they wouldn't eat. "Found something else," he said, dropping a plastic bag on my desk. "Hair samples from that tree where we saw the eyes." The hair was like nothing I'd ever seen. Coarse and dark, almost black, but when you held it up to the light, it had a reddish tint. Each strand was about 4 inches long and thick as wire. "Sent some to the state lab," Pete said. "But between you and me, I don't think they're going to find a match." "Why's that?" "Because I already ran it past every wildlife expert I know. It's not bear, not cat, not deer, not dog. It's not from any animal that's supposed to live in these mountains." That afternoon, 3 more calls came in. More livestock kills, all following the same pattern. Triangle arrangements, impossible claw marks, tracks that changed from human to animal. And that smell. Always that sulfur smell that burned your nose and made your eyes water. I was starting to notice something else too. All the kills were happening near old Cherokee burial sites. My great-granddaddy had told me about them when I was a boy. Paul, Aces, where the Cherokee had buried their dead before the government moved them out in the 1830s. Sacred ground that wasn't supposed to be disturbed. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I went to see Mary Crow Feather, an old Cherokee woman who lived in a trailer park down in Front Royal. She was about 80 years old and one of the few people who still knew the old stories. "You're that ranger boy," she said when I knocked on her door. "Your great-granddaddy was Jim Hawthorne, wasn't he?" "Yes, ma'am. How did you—" "I knew him when we were young, before they made us leave the mountains." She stepped aside to let me in. "You're here about the Wampas Cat, aren't you?" The name hit me like a slap. "The what?" Mary poured coffee from an old percolator and settled into a rocking chair that had seen better days. "Cherokee woman, long time ago. White soldiers killed her husband and children during the removal. She went crazy with grief and rage, cursed herself to become something that could protect the burial grounds from being disturbed." "That's just a story," I said. Mary's dark eyes fixed on mine. "Your great-granddaddy didn't think so. He saw her once, during the Depression. Told me about it before he died." She stood and walked to an old wooden chest, pulling out a faded leather journal. "He wrote it all down," she said, handing me the book. "Every detail. Said people needed to know, in case she ever came back." I opened the journal with trembling hands. The handwriting was my great-granddaddy's, same careful script I remembered from old letters. The entry was dated August 1931. "Saw the beast of Blue Ridge tonight. Cherokee woman's curse made real. 6 feet tall when she stands upright, covered in dark fur, eyes like yellow fire, claws like knives, teeth like a panther. She kills to protect the old burial grounds from those who would disturb them. Found 3 men torn apart near Stony Man Mountain. They'd been digging for Cherokee gold." My hands were shaking as I read on. She can change from walking upright to running on all fours, faster than any natural thing. Smart, too. Knows when she's being hunted and always stays 1 step ahead. Only comes out during the hottest summers, when the mountain spirits are restless. Kills in patterns, arranges bodies to send a message. Stay away from the sacred places. "How do you stop her?" I asked Mary. The old woman shook her head. "You don't stop her. You respect her. She's protecting something sacred, something your people destroyed when they drove us from our homes. The burial grounds on Stony Man, on Old Rag, all through these mountains, they're still sacred to us. But white folks keep disturbing them, looking for souvenirs or thinking they're just old rocks." I thought about the Henderson family. Some tourists went missing, a family from Richmond. Mary's face went sad. They probably found one of the burial sites. Maybe thought they'd take home some Cherokee arrowheads or pottery. She doesn't forgive that kind of disrespect. "So they're dead?" "If they disturbed sacred ground, yes. And she'll keep killing until people learn to stay away." I drove back up the mountain with my head spinning. Part of me wanted to dismiss Mary's story as superstition, but I couldn't forget those yellow eyes watching us from an impossible cliff face. Back at the ranger station, I found a message from the state lab. The hair samples Pete had sent came back as unknown species, possibly contaminated sample. They wanted more specimens for further testing. I tried to radio dispatch, but all I got was static mixed with strange sounds, like howling, but distorted through electronic interference. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice speaking Cherokee words I didn't understand, coming through my emergency radio frequency. I grabbed my rifle and headed for the door. If the Wampas Cat was real, if she was what killed the Henderson family, then I had to find her before she killed again. But as I stepped outside, I realized something that made my skin crawl. I couldn't remember loading my rifle, but the magazine was empty. The Henderson family's bodies were found the next morning by a search and rescue team. They'd been arranged in the same triangle pattern as all the other kills, but this time it was different. Personal. The father had been found clutching a Cherokee pottery shard in his dead hand, and scattered around the bodies were dozens of arrowheads and other artifacts they'd been collecting from what they probably thought was just an old campsite. But I knew better now. Thanks to my great-granddaddy's journal and Mary Crow Feather's stories, I knew they'd been digging in a Cherokee burial ground. Sheriff called it an animal attack, probably a rogue bear. The area was closed to camping indefinitely, and that should have been the end of it. But I couldn't let it go. 3 people were dead because they'd disturbed sacred ground, and something told me the killing wasn't over. That night, I drove to Stony Man Mountain alone, left my radio in the truck and took only my rifle, a flashlight, and my great-granddaddy's journal. If the Wampas Cat was real, if she was protecting Cherokee burial sites, then maybe I could reason with her. Maybe I could make her understand that not all white folks wanted to disturb what was sacred. The trail up Stony Man was steep and rocky, winding through mountain laurel and oak trees that seemed to lean in close like they were trying to whisper secrets. The air was still thick with heat, no breeze to cool the sweat that ran down my back. Every step seemed to echo in the stillness. I found the burial ground about half a mile up the trail. It didn't look like much to untrained eyes, just a flat area surrounded by old oak trees with some moss-covered stones arranged in rough circles. But my great-granddaddy's journal had described it perfectly, and I could feel something in the air. A weight, like the mountain itself was watching. The Hendersons had made a mess of the place, and holes dug everywhere, sacred stones overturned, artifacts scattered like trash. It made me sick to look at it. "I know you're here," I said to the darkness. "I know what this place is, what it means." The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Then, slowly, I became aware of breathing that wasn't my own. Deep, steady breaths coming from somewhere in the trees above me. "I'm not here to hurt you," I said. "I'm here to help." A branch cracked somewhere to my left. I turned my flashlight toward the sound but saw nothing except shadows and leaves. Then I heard her voice. It was the Cherokee words I'd heard on my radio, but now I could tell it was a woman speaking. The voice was rough, like someone who'd been screaming for a long time, but underneath it was pain so deep it made my chest ache. "You understand English?" I asked. The voice switched languages, speaking English with an accent I'd never heard before. "I understand the words of those who took my home, killed my children, drove my people from these mountains." I could see her now, standing at the edge of the tree line, 6 feet tall when she stood upright, just like my great-granddaddy had written. Dark fur covered her body, but her face was almost human, a woman's face twisted by grief and rage. Her eyes glowed yellow in my flashlight beam, and when she opened her mouth, I could see fangs like a panther's. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I'm sorry for what my people did to yours, but killing innocent families won't bring your children back." She stepped closer, and I could see the long claws that had carved those gouges in the trees. "Innocent?" Her voice was like gravel and smoke. "They came to sacred ground and stole from the dead, scattered the remains of my ancestors like garbage. There is no innocence in such disrespect." "You're right," I said. "What they did was wrong, but there has to be another way. For 140 years I have watched your people destroy what is sacred, build roads through burial grounds, let children play with Cherokee bones they find in caves, turn our sacred places into tourist attractions." She was close enough now that I could smell that sulfur scent, see the pain in her glowing eyes. When did talking ever stop the destruction? I thought about Mary Crow Feather's words, about respecting what was sacred. What if I helped you protect this place, made sure no one else disturbed it? The Wampas Cat tilted her head, studying me with those terrible, beautiful eyes. "You would do this? Even knowing what I am? What I have done?" "Yes." For a moment, I thought she might actually consider it. But then her expression changed, became suspicious and angry again. "Your great-grandfather made the same promise," she said. "After he saw me kill those men in 1931. He said he would keep people away from the burial grounds. But look around you. Look what his protection was worth. She was right, and we both knew it. My great-granddaddy had died 20 years ago, and the Park Service had never been told about the Cherokee sites. Tourists and campers had been wandering through sacred ground for decades. "I'm not my great-grandfather," I said. "I'll do better." The Wampas Cat laughed, a sound like wind through broken glass. "You will grow old and die, and the next ranger will know nothing of promises made to a Cherokee ghost. The destruction will continue, just as it always has." She was moving now, circling me like a predator. I kept turning to keep her in sight, but she moved with impossible grace, sometimes upright like a woman, sometimes dropping to all fours like an animal. "There is only one language your people understand," she said. "Fear. When they are afraid, they stay away. So you'll keep killing? Until they learn to respect what is sacred, yes." I realized then that there was no reasoning with her, no promise I could make that would stop the killing. She was protecting something bigger than either of us, something that had been violated too many times over too many years. The grief and rage that had transformed her into this creature were too deep, too old to heal with words. But I couldn't let her keep killing innocent people either. I raised my rifle. The Wampas Cat smiled, showing those panther fangs. "You think your gun can stop what I have become?" "I have to try." She moved faster than anything I'd ever seen. One second she was 20 feet away, the next she was right in front of me, knocking the rifle from my hands with one sweep of those terrible claws. I fell backward, landing hard on the rocky ground. She stood over me, and I could feel the heat radiating from her body like a fever. "I could kill you right now," she whispered. "Tear you apart like I did those tourists. But I won't." "Why not?" "Because you came here alone, knowing what I was, to try to protect people you don't even know. Because you showed respect for sacred ground that your own people have forgotten." She stepped back, and I could see sadness in her glowing eyes. "And because your great-grandfather was kind to me once, long ago." I struggled to my feet, legs shaking. "So what happens now?" "Now you leave. You tell people this area is dangerous, that there's a rogue animal in the mountains. You keep them away from the burial grounds, all of them, not just this one. And maybe, if you do your job well enough, there won't be any more killing." "And if I can't keep them away?" The Wampas Cat was already fading back into the shadows, becoming one with the darkness under the trees. "Then I will do what I was cursed to do. I will protect the sacred places, no matter the cost." Her voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Remember, Ranger Hawthorne, the old ways must be respected, or the killing will never end." Then she was gone, and I was alone with the night and the weight of an possible promise. I kept my word as much as I could. The next morning I filed reports with the Park Service recommending that large sections of the Blue Ridge be closed to camping indefinitely. Cited unstable wildlife populations, dangerous terrain, risk of forest fires in the drought conditions. Most of it was true, even if it wasn't the whole truth. I also started talking to people, other rangers, local historians, anyone who might know about Cherokee burial sites in the mountains. Slowly, quietly, I began mapping out the sacred places that needed protection. Not officially, of course. That would have raised too many questions I couldn't answer. But I made sure those areas got extra patrols, made sure camping permits weren't issued for nearby areas, made sure the trails that led to burial grounds somehow always seemed to be blocked by fallen trees or washed out by sudden storms. The killings stopped, mostly. There was one more incident, 3 years later. Some college kids from Virginia Tech who thought they knew better than Park Service warnings. They ignored the area closed signs and went camping near Old Rag Mountain, right on top of what I later learned was one of the largest Cherokee burial sites in the park. They were found the same way as all the others. Triangle arrangement, ritual positioning, death by massive trauma from claws and fangs, no known animal possessed. The official report called it a bear attack, same as always. But I knew better. I visited Mary Crowfeather a few times over the years, bringing her tobacco and asking questions about Cherokee history. She taught me which plants were sacred, which stones marked burial sites, which areas should never be disturbed. In return, I made sure those places stayed protected. Mary died in 1981, but before she passed, she gave me something that belonged to my great-grandfather, a small leather pouch filled with Cherokee herbs. "For protection," she said, "in case you ever meet her again." I never did meet the Wampas Cat again, at least not face to face, but sometimes, on the hottest August nights when the mountain holds its breath and even the insects go quiet, I'll be up at the fire lookout and hear that howling echo off the cliff faces. Not quite human, not quite animal. And sometimes, if I'm walking the trails near the old burial grounds, I'll catch that sulfur smell on the wind. Or I'll find fresh claw marks on trees, 6 parallel gouges about 8 feet off the ground that weep sap like tears. She's still out there, still protecting what's sacred. Still keeping the old promise that transformed her from a grieving Cherokee woman into something else, something that bridges the gap between human and animal, between the living and the dead. I retired from the Park Service in 1995, but I still live in these mountains. Still keep an eye on the sacred places. Still make sure the burial grounds stay undisturbed. My son thinks I'm just a crazy old man who talks to himself in Cherokee words I learned from Mary Crowfeather. Maybe he's right. But every August, when the heat presses down on these mountains like a weight and the whole forest goes silent, I remember those yellow eyes watching me from an impossible cliff face. I remember the sound of a woman's voice speaking words of grief and rage that echo through time itself. And I keep my promise. Because some things are more important than what people think is possible. Some places are too sacred to be disturbed, and some promises once made have to be kept forever. The Cherokee called these mountains home for thousands of years before white folks arrived. They buried their dead here, prayed here, lived and loved and raised their children here. Then we drove them out and tried to pretend they'd never existed at all. But the mountains remember. And sometimes when we forget to show proper respect, the mountains remind us. So if you ever find yourself hiking in Shenandoah, especially on those hot August Saint nights when the air is thick and still, pay attention to the signs. Stay on the marked trails. Don't go looking for souvenirs in places that feel old and sacred. Don't disturb stones that have been arranged in circles, or dig around in caves that seem too quiet. And if you hear something howling in the distance, something that doesn't sound quite human but doesn't sound quite animal either, maybe it's time to head back to your car. Because the Wampas Cat is still out there, still protecting what's sacred. Still keeping watch over the burial grounds of her people, still waiting for the next person who thinks they can take whatever they want from these ancient mountains. Just remember, some promises are written in blood and carved in stone, and some guardian spirits never rest, never forgive, and never forget. The mountains will always remember what we try so hard to forget. And sometimes on the hottest nights of summer, they'll remind us in ways we'll never be able to explain to anyone who wasn't there. My name is Caleb Ravenshollow, and I've been pulling folks out of trouble spots in these mountains for 21 years. Cave rescue, that's my job. When someone gets lost in the dark holes under the Smoky Mountains, they call me. I know every tunnel, every crack, every dangerous spot from here to Cataract Falls. My daddy was a coal miner and his daddy before him. I worked the mines myself until that bad collapse took 3 of my friends. After that, I figured I'd use what I learned about caves to help people instead of digging coal. People always ask me about ghost stories. These old mountains are full of them. Miners used to tell tales about spirits in the tunnels, dead men still swinging their pickaxes. I never put stock in those stories. Wind through the rocks makes all kinds of sounds. Scared men hear what they want to hear. That was before October 1981. The rain had been coming down hard for 3 days. Water filled up the old mine entrances like bathtubs. The temperature dropped to 35 degrees, and we even got some early snow. Not the best time to be crawling around underground, but that's when people usually need help the most. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Two college boys had gone spelunking in the old copper mines near Cataract Falls. They made it out okay, but they were shaking like leaves. Said they heard screaming coming from deep in the tunnels. Human screaming, they swore up and down. Probably just wind, I told Sheriff Morrison when he called me. Those copper mines got sealed up 40 years ago. Concrete plugs thick as your arm. Nothing down there but rocks and water now. But the sheriff wanted me to check it out anyway. Those college boys were pretty upset. One of them kept saying he heard voices calling for help, said it sounded like men trapped and trying to dig their way out. I loaded up my truck with the usual gear. Petzl hear it. Lamp, extra batteries, static rope, emergency oxygen, and my atmospheric monitor to check for bad air. The old copper mines could be tricky. Sometimes gases built up in the sealed sections. The drive to Cataract Falls took me through the old company town ruins. Nothing left now but some foundation stones and rusted machinery. Back in the 1800s, this whole area buzzed with miners and their families. The copper played out eventually, and everyone moved on. The mining company sealed the tunnels in 1941 for safety. I parked near the main entrance. The concrete seal looked solid, no cracks or damage. But there were other ways in if you knew where to look. The college boys had found one of the old air shafts about a quarter mile up the ridge. The shaft dropped down 20 feet to connect with the main tunnel system. I rigged my rope and rappelled down, checking the walls with my light. Everything looked normal. Limestone and sandstone, some old timber supports that hadn't rotted yet. My boots hit the tunnel floor with a splash. The recent rains had left about 6 inches of muddy water covering everything. I started walking toward where the main mining area used to be, following the old rail tracks that were still embedded in the stone. That's when I saw the first footprint. It was clear as day in the mud. A boot print, fresh, leading toward the sealed section. But that made no sense. The college boys had come in through the same entrance I used, and their tracks should have been washed away by the water that had been flowing through here. I followed the prints for about 50 yards until they stopped at the concrete wall that sealed off the deeper mines. The prints went right up to the wall and stopped, like whoever made them had walked straight through solid concrete. I checked my watch. Been down here 30 minutes already. My headlamp showed no signs of other people. That those footprints bothered me. I took some photos and measured them. Size 11 boots, work boots by the look of the tread. The air felt wrong too. Not bad air. My monitor showed normal. Oxygen levels. But it felt thick somehow, like before a thunderstorm. And cold. Way colder than it should have been underground. I was about to head back when I heard it. A sound like metal hitting stone. Slow and steady. Clang. 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 It was coming from behind the concrete wall. I stood there listening for a full minute. The sound kept going. Clang, clang, clang. Like someone hitting rock with a pickaxe. But that was impossible. That section had been sealed for 40 years. I pressed my ear against the concrete. The sound got louder. Definitely metal on stone. And underneath it, something else. Voices. Faint, but definitely human voices. My radio crackled. Caleb, you copy? It was Morrison. Yeah, I'm here. Find anything? I hesitated. Still checking. Give me another hour. Those college boys are here at the station. They want to know if you heard the screaming. I looked at the concrete wall. Not yet, but I'm hearing something. The sound stopped while I was talking to Morrison. When I clicked off the radio, everything went quiet, except for the drip of water somewhere in the darkness. I decided to check the other entrances. Maybe someone had found another way in. The old mining operation had dozens of shafts and tunnels. Most were sealed, but 40 years was a long time. Concrete could crack. Trees could grow and shift things around. I spent the next 2 hours checking every entrance I knew about. All sealed tight. No fresh digging, no new openings. But I kept finding those boot prints, always leading toward the sealed areas, always stopping at solid walls. By afternoon, I had to admit something strange was going on. I called in Jake Morrison, not the sheriff, but his nephew who worked as a state mine inspector. Jake knew more about these old operations than anyone. He met me at the site around 4 o'clock. Jake was a thin man with thick G's, lasses, and a clipboard always in his hand. He'd been inside more abandoned mines than anyone in Tennessee. "You look worried, Caleb," he said as we geared up. "Found some things that don't make sense." We went down the air shaft together. Jake saw the footprints right away. "Fresh," he said, kneeling to examine them. "Maybe 12 hours old. They lead to the sealed section." Jake followed the prints with his flashlight. When we got to the concrete wall, he ran his hands over the surface. "Solid," he said. "No cracks, no holes. Nobody's been through here." That's when the sound started again, the metal on stone clanging, coming from behind the wall. Jake's face went white. "What the hell is that?" "Been going on all day," I said. "Listen." We stood there quietly. The clanging continued, steady as a heartbeat, and underneath it, those voices. More than one person talking in low tones. I couldn't make out words, but it definitely sounded like men working. Jake pulled out his own radio and called the state office. "I need the original mine surveys for the Cataract Falls copper operation," he said. "Everything you've got." While we waited, we explored more of the accessible tunnels. Jake had brought his own atmospheric monitor and a sound detection device he used for finding people trapped in collapsed mines. The sound detector went crazy near the sealed sections. It picked up rhythmic impacts, voices, even what sounded like wooden cartwheels rolling on tracks. But according to the sound detector, it was all coming from solid rock. "This equipment doesn't lie," Jake said, staring at the readings. "There are people working behind these walls, but that's impossible." We found more boot prints, different sizes now, like a whole crew of workers had been through. Some looked like old-fashioned mining boots, the kind with metal cleats that hadn't been used in decades. Jake's radio crackled. "I've got those survey maps," the voice said. "Sending them over now." We went back to Jake's truck to look at the maps on his laptop. What we saw made no sense at all. According to the original surveys from the 1880s, there were 3 main tunnel systems in the Cataract Falls mine. We'd been exploring the first system all day. The second and third systems were supposed to be sealed off separately, accessed through different entrances. But the maps Jake got from the state office showed only one tunnel system. The other 2 weren't on the modern maps at all. "Someone made a mistake," Jake said. "These old records are a mess sometimes." But I wasn't so sure. What if there are tunnels down there that nobody knows about anymore? Jake looked at me over his glasses. "Caleb, I've surveyed every mine in this county. I know what's down there." That's when we heard the screaming. It came up from the mine entrance like a wind, but there was no wind. Human voices, shouting and crying out. Not words, just sounds of fear and pain. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, then cut off like someone had slammed a door. Jake and I looked at each other. "We need more help," he said. By the next morning, we had a full investigation team. Jake brought 2 more state inspectors, and Sheriff Morrison sent his deputy, Tom Bradley. I also called in Sarah Chen, a geologist from the university who specialized in cave systems. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but we were all thinking the same thing. Someone was trapped down there, and we had to find them. We set up a base camp near the main entrance. Sarah brought ground-penetrating radar equipment to map what was actually under the mountain. Jake had requisitioned portable lights and a gasoline-powered generator. The radar results were the first real shock. "There are definitely more tunnels down there," Sarah said, pointing at her computer screen. "Look at this." The radar showed a complex network of passages that didn't match any of the mine surveys. Some of them looked natural, like caves formed by underground water, but others were clearly man-made, with straight walls and regular spacing. "These tunnels connect to your sealed sections," she told me. "Someone could be getting in through an entrance we haven't found." We decided to split up and search the whole area systematically. Jake and one of his inspectors would check the north ridge for hidden entrances. Sarah and Tom would search the south side. I would go back underground and try to follow the sounds. I went down alone around noon. The water level had dropped some, making it easier to move around. But the air still felt wrong, thick and cold. The sound started as soon as I got to the bottom of the shaft. Not just the metal on stone clanging now, but voices. Clear human voices. coming from behind the sealed wall. I pressed my ear against the concrete and listened, men talking in normal conversational tones. I couldn't make out words, but the rhythm sounded like people working together, calling out instructions to each other. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. "Watch that timber, boys. She's starting to crack." The voice was clear as day, coming from right on the other side of the wall. An old man's voice with an accent I recognized. The kind of accent my grandfather had, the one mountain folks used 100 years ago. I grabbed my radio. "Jake, you there?" Static. No answer. "Sarah, Tom, anybody copy?" Nothing. Radio was dead. I tried my cell phone. No signal, which was normal underground. But my radio should have worked. We tested it that morning. I decided to head back up and get the others. But when I turned around, my headlamp beam hit something that shouldn't have been there. Mining tools, a pickaxe, a shovel, and a wooden cart, sitting in the tunnel like someone had just put them down for a break. They hadn't been there when I came in. I approached the tools carefully. They looked old, really old. The wooden handles were dark with age and wear. The metal parts showed rust, but not recent rust. This was the kind of corrosion that took decades to develop. I picked up the pickaxe. It was heavy, heavier than modern tools. The handle was smooth from years of use, and carved into the wood were the initials JM. Behind me, a voice said, "That's my pick, son. Been looking for it." I spun around, nearly dropping the tool. A man stood in the tunnel about 10 feet away, older, maybe 60, wearing clothes I'd never seen except in old photographs. Canvas pants, suspenders, and a leather hat with a brass lamp mounted on the front. His face was gaunt and his eyes looked sunken in the shadows. But I could see through him, like looking at someone through dirty glass. "Who are you?" I managed to say. "Name's Jeremiah Mason," he said. "Been working this mine since 1878. You're new." I blinked hard and looked again. He was still there, still see-through, still talking like this was the most normal thing in the world. "The mine's been closed for 40 years, I said. Jeremiah looked confused. "Closed? Boy, we got copper to dig. Can't close till we get the boys out." "What boys?" "The ones trapped in the north tunnel. Cave-in happened 3 days ago. We've been trying to dig them out, but the rock keeps falling." He pointed toward the sealed wall. "They're still in there, calling for help." My head was spinning. This had to be some kind of hallucination, bad air, maybe, or exhaustion. "What year do you think it is?" I asked. 1881 course, October 15th. Why?" I closed my eyes and counted to 10. When I opened them, Jeremiah was gone. But the mining tools were still there. I heard voices again, more of them now, coming from all around me, not just behind the sealed wall. Men talking, laughing, calling out to each other. The sounds of a working mine. My headlamp started flickering. The beam got dimmer and dimmer until I could barely see 5 feet in front of me. I fumbled for my spare batteries, but when I tried to change them, my hands were shaking so bad I dropped the battery pack. It rolled away into the darkness. That's when the lights appeared. Little yellow flames, dozens of them, moving through the tunnels like a parade of candles. But they weren't candles. They were the brass lamps that old-time miners wore on their hats. The flames came closer. I could see the shapes of men behind them now, walking in a line through the tunnel. Some carried pickaxes and shovels. Others pushed wooden carts loaded with rocks and dirt. They walked right past me like I wasn't there. Their boots made no sound in the water. They cast no shadows on the walls. I followed them toward the sealed section. When they reached the concrete wall, they walked straight through it without slowing down. The last man in line stopped and turned to look at me. He was young, maybe 20, with a thick mustache and worried eyes. "You coming?" he asked. "We need all the help we can get. The boys are running out of time." Before I could answer, he turned and walked through the wall. I ran to the concrete and pounded on it with my fists. "Let me in! How do I get in?" The wall was solid, cold and solid and completely real. But from the other side, I could hear them working. Dozens of men, digging frantically, calling out encouragement to someone I couldn't see. "Hold on, boys, we're almost through." Keep digging. They're still alive in there. Don't give up. We're coming. I don't know how long I stood there listening. Could have been minutes or hours. Time felt wrong in that place, like it was flowing in different directions at once. When my backup headlamp finally started working again, I saw more tools scattered around the tunnel. Not just the ones I'd found before, but dozens of them. Picks and shovels and hammers, all old, all used, all arranged like men had just put them down to take a break. And scratched into the wall in letters that looked fresh were Unatural, Mies and dates. J. Mason, Oct. 15, 1881. W. Thompson, Oct. 15, 1881. R. Garrett, Oct. 15, 1881. The list went on and on, dozens of names, all with the same date. I finally understood what I was seeing. These weren't just ghosts. These were the spirits of miners who had died in a cave-in on October 15, 1881. They'd been trapped underground, and now, 100 years later, they were still trying to save their friends. They were still trying to dig them out, and they wanted my help. I stumbled back up the air shaft like something was chasing me. By the time I reached the surface, the sun was setting. Sarah and Tom were at the base camp looking worried. "Where have you been?" Sarah asked. "We lost radio contact hours ago." "Did you find anything?" Tom wanted to know. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but it sounded crazy even to me. Ghost miners, see-through people, names carved in stone. They looked at me like I'd been breathing bad air. "We need to get you checked out," Sarah said. "You might have been exposed to gases." But Jake believed me. When he and the other inspector got back from searching the North Ridge, Jake took one look at my face and nodded. "You saw them too," he said. "You've seen them? Found something up on the ridge. You need to see this." Jake led us up a steep trail to a flat area about 200 feet above the mine entrance. Hidden in the trees was an old cemetery. Not a proper cemetery with headstones, just wooden crosses and piles of stones. "Company burial ground," Jake said, "for miners who died on the job." There were 43 graves. I counted them twice. Most of the wooden crosses had rotted away, but a few still had names carved on them, names that matched the list I'd seen scratched in the tunnel wall. October 15, 1881, Jake read from a metal plaque near the entrance. Cave-in the North Tunnel claimed 41 lives. 2 additional men died in rescue attempts. Sarah was taking photos with her flash camera. "So what's this got to do with what you saw underground?" "I think they're still down there," I said, "still trying to dig out their friends." Tom laughed, but it sounded nervous. "Come on, Caleb. Dead is dead." That's when we heard the screaming again. It came up from the mine like steam from a kettle. Dozens of voices crying out in fear and pain. But this time we could make out words. "Help us! We're trapped! The roof's coming down! Can't breathe! Help us!" We all heard it. Sarah's face went white. Tom stopped laughing. Even Jake, who'd been in hundreds of mines, looked scared. The screaming went on for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. In the silence that followed, we could hear another sound. Dozens of men working frantically, digging with picks and shovels, calling out to the trapped miners. "They're still trying to save them," I said. "After 100 years, they're still trying to save them." Jake looked at the cemetery, then at the mine entrance. "We need to get down there. All of us. Tonight." "Are you crazy?" Tom said. "After what Caleb just told us?" "Don't you understand?" Jake said. "Those men died trying to save their friends. They've been trapped down there for a century, reliving the worst day of their lives over and over again. We have to help them." Sarah was the first to agree. "If there's even a chance that Caleb's right, we have to try something." We went back to base camp and planned our approach. Jake had brought explosives for clearing rock falls, but we decided to try talking to them first. Maybe if we could make them understand that they were already dead, they could finally rest. We went down the air shaft together around midnight. All of us had backup lights and emergency air supplies. Jake carried a portable radio that broadcast on emergency frequencies. The mine was different at night. Colder, and the air felt thicker. Our lights seemed dimmer, like the darkness was pushing back against them. The phantom tools were everywhere now, scattered throughout the tunnels, arranged like a crew of workers had just stepped away for lunch, and the sounds were louder. Voices, digging, the rumble of carts on wooden tracks. When we reached the sealed section, we could see them. Dozens of ghostly figures working frantically at the rock wall. They moved like men who'd been digging for days without rest, driven by desperation to save their trapped friends. Jeremiah Mason was there, swinging his pickaxe at stones that didn't seem to move. Next to him was the young man with the mustache who'd asked me to help. All around them, other miners dug and hauled rock and called out encouragement to men we couldn't see. "They can't see us," Sarah whispered. "They're in their own time," Jake said, living through October 15th, 1881, over and over again. I stepped forward. "Jeremiah!" The old miner stopped digging and turned around. "You came back, son. Good. We need fresh hands." "Jeremiah, what year is it?" 1881, course. October 15th. The boys been trapped for 3 days now. We're almost through to them." I looked at Jake, who nodded encouragement. "Jeremiah, I need to tell you something. It's not 1881. It's 1981. You and your men died in that cave-in 100 years ago." The ghost miner stared at me. Around him, the other spirits kept working, but more slowly. A few stopped and listened. "That's not possible," Jeremiah said. "I'm standing right here talking to you. Feel fine." "Look at yourself," Sarah said. "Look at your hands." Jeremiah held up his hands. Even in the dim light, we could see through them to the rock wall behind. "We've been trying to save the boys in the north tunnel," he said, and his voice sounded far away. "But every time we get close, more rock falls. Every time we start over, it's the same day. Same cave-in, same trapped men calling for help." The other spirits had stopped working now. They gathered around us, their faces confused and frightened. "Are we dead?" the young man with the mustache asked. "Yes," Jake said gently. "You died trying to save your friends. All of you. You've been men and heroes for 100 years. But the boys in the North Tunnel, they died too," I said. "On the same day, October 15th, 1881. You couldn't save them because they were already gone." One by one, the spirits began to understand. Some looked relieved. Others seemed angry or sad. But they all looked tired, like men who'd been carrying a heavy load for too long. "So we can stop digging now?" Jeremiah asked. "You can rest," Jake said. "You've done enough, more than enough." The ghostly miners laid down their tools. The young man with the mustache smiled for the first time. "I'd like to see my family again," he said. One by one, they began to fade. Not disappearing exactly, but becoming lighter, like morning mist when the sun hits it. Some waved goodbye. Others just nodded and walked away into the darkness. Jeremiah was the last to go. "Thank you, son," he said to me. "We've been trying to go home for a long time." Then he was gone, and the mine was quiet, except for the drip of water and the sound of our own breathing. We stood there for a while, not knowing what to say. Finally, Tom broke the silence. "Think they'll stay gone?" Before anyone could answer, we heard a deep rumble from somewhere below us. The floor shook, and dust fell from the ceiling. "Cave in!" Jake shouted. "Everyone out!" We ran for the air shaft as the tunnels collapsed behind us. Rock and timber crashed down, sealing the mine forever. We made it to the surface just as the ground settled with a final, satisfied sigh. When the dust cleared, the entrance to the Cataract Falls mine was completely blocked. Tons of rock had filled in the air shaft and probably most of the tunnel system. "Looks like they took care of the problem themselves," Sarah said. The official report said the mine collapsed due to water damage and structural instability. The state sealed off the area permanently and posted warning signs, and nobody mentioned ghosts or phantom miners in the paperwork. But I knew the truth. Those men had been trapped underground for a century, reliving their worst day over and over again, trying to save friends who were already dead. When we finally helped them understand what had happened, they could let go and find peace. The problem it changed me. After 21 years of cave rescue work, I couldn't go underground anymore. Every time I tried, I'd start shaking and sweating. The darkness felt alive, watching me. I kept hearing voices that might or might not be real. I retired from cave rescue 6 months later. The department said I had post-traumatic stress from the mine collapse. They gave me a nice pension and a plaque thanking me for my service. Jake Morrison understood what really happened. He quietly started researching other old mines throughout the Appalachian Mountains, looking for similar incidents. He found dozens of them, mining accidents where the bodies were never recovered, families that never got closure, graves that were empty because there was nothing left to bury. Some people die so hard they don't know they're gone, Jake told me one day, especially when they die trying to save someone else. Sarah Chen published a paper about the geological instability of old mining operations. She recommended that all abandoned mines be properly sealed to prevent accidents. She never mentioned what we'd really seen underground, but she made sure those dangerous places would be closed forever. Tom Bradley transferred to a different county, said he wanted to work somewhere with less history. As for me, I found other ways to help people. I teach rock climbing and rappelling to search and rescue teams. I consult on outdoor safety for the Park Service. And sometimes, late at night, I drive out to places where mining disasters happened long ago. I listen for sounds that shouldn't be there, voices calling for help, the clang of metal on stone, the rumble of cartwheels that stopped moving a century ago. Because now I know the truth that most people do. I want to believe. Some folks died so hard they don't know they're gone. They're still down there in the dark places, still trying to finish what they started, still trying to save people who can't be saved. And sometimes they need someone to tell them it's okay to stop trying. Sometimes they need someone to tell them it's time to go home. If you ever hear voices coming from old mine shafts or abandoned tunnels, don't go investigating by yourself. Some mysteries are better left alone. But if you do go down into those dark places, remember what I learned in the Cataract Falls mine. The dead aren't always gone. Sometimes they're just lost. And sometimes all they need is someone to show them the way home. My name is Isaiah Thornberry, and I've been studying plants in these North Carolina mountains for 19 years. Most folks think I'm crazy for spending my life crawling around in the dirt, looking at leaves and flowers. But I love it. Plants tell stories if you know how to listen. I work for the Forest Service at Pisgah National Forest, right near Grandfather Mountain. My job is to find rare plants and make sure nobody hurts them. I've even discovered 3 new types of plants that nobody knew about before. Universities call me when they need help with mountain plants. Before I became a plant man, I studied to be a preacher, but God led me to the woods instead of a church. I figured He speaks through nature just as much as through sermons. The mountains are my cathedral now. People around here have always told stories about witches in the woods. Old mountain folks say women used to gather herbs and make medicines, and scared people called them witches. I never believed the spooky parts. I figured it was just old-time medicine that people didn't understand. But everything changed in September 1975 when I found something that made no sense at all. It started with a phone call from my boss. Isaiah, we got reports of weird plant growth up in Haint Hollow. Folks say plants are growing in perfect circles overnight. Sounds like nonsense, but you better check it out. Haint Hollow sits deep in the mountains, 12 miles from the nearest road. You have to hike for hours through thick forest to get there. It's a beautiful place. Old rhododendron bushes tall as trees, clear springs bubbling up from the rocks, and moss so green it almost glows. The Cherokee used to live here. I'd found old pottery pieces and arrowheads over the years. Local stories said it was a special place for their medicine women, where they gathered herbs and taught healing. But there were darker stories, too. During the 1800s, when people got scared of anything they didn't understand, they accused some local women of being witches, said they made evil magic with plants. A mob killed 3 women right here in the hollow, burned them alive near the old spring. I never paid much attention to ghost stories. Dead is dead, I figured. My job was studying living plants, not chasing shadows. The hike to Haint Hollow took me 3 hours. The September heat was thick as honey, and my shirt stuck to my back with sweat. Storm clouds were building over the mountains, making the air feel heavy and strange. When I finally reached the hollow, I stopped dead in my tracks. Plants were growing in perfect circles. Not just one or two circles, dozens of them scattered across the forest floor like someone had drawn them with a giant compass. Each circle was exactly the same size, about 6 feet across. But that wasn't the strangest part. The plants inside each circle were all different types, ones that never grow together in nature. I saw ginseng next to bloodroot, wild ginger beside golden seal, and mountain mint growing with herbs I'd never seen before. I pulled out my notebook and started writing everything down. This was impossible. These plants needed different types of soil, different amounts of sunlight. Some grew in spring, others in fall. Yet here they were, all growing together like they were best friends. I knelt down and touched one of the circles. The soil felt warm, even though the sun wasn't shining on it. The plants looked healthier than anything I'd ever seen. Thick green leaves, strong stems, flowers blooming out of season. Something was very wrong here, but I'm a scientist. There had to be an explanation. I spent the rest of the day taking pictures and collecting samples. When I tried to use my camera, strange things happened. The lens cap kept falling off by itself. My compass spun in crazy circles instead of pointing north, and I kept feeling like someone was watching me from the trees. As the sun started setting, I packed up my gear and headed home. But I couldn't stop thinking about those circles. In 19 years of plant work, I'd never seen anything like it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those perfect circles in my mind, those impossible gardens growing in the deep woods. Something was happening in Haint Hollow, something that didn't follow any rules I knew. And I had to find out what it was. I went back to Haint Hollow 3 days later, loaded down with every piece of equipment I could carry. pH meters to test the soil, magnifying glasses to study the plants up close, and fresh film for my camera. I was determined to figure out what was making those plants grow so strangely. The hike felt different this time. The woods were too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even my footsteps on the trail seemed muffled, like the forest was holding its breath. When I reached the hollow, I couldn't believe what I saw. There were twice as many plant circles as before. They'd appeared overnight, scattered across the forest floor like crop circles made by nature itself. I set up my equipment and got to work. The soil tests came back normal, nothing weird about the dirt. The plants looked even healthier than before, practically glowing with life. Some had grown a foot taller in just 3 days, which should have been impossible. I was taking pictures when my camera started acting up again. Every shot came out blurry, even though I was holding it steady. But when I looked at the pictures later, I saw things that weren't there when I took them. In one photo, there was a shadow of a woman kneeling in a plant circle, even though I was alone in the woods. In another, I could see what looked like basket shapes near the circles, like someone had been gathering herbs. But the pictures weren't the strangest thing. The strangest thing was my notebook. I always write down everything I see in my field note. Book, what plants I find, where they're growing, what the weather is like. It's habit after 19 years. But when I opened my notebook that evening back at home, I found pages covered with handwriting that wasn't mine. The writing was in old-fashioned script, the kind they used to teach in schools 100 years ago. It was all about the plants I'd seen that day, but it included information I didn't know. Names of herbs I'd never heard of. Uses for plants that weren't in any of my books. Bloodroot and wild ginger together make a tea for women's pain, one entry said. Golden seal with mountain mint heals children's fever. Mix them when the moon is dark and the need is great. My hands started shaking as I read. I live alone. Nobody else had touched my notebook. But there it was, page after page of plant knowledge written in someone else's hand. I called my friend Jake Riddle, a Cherokee elder who knows more about traditional plant medicine than anyone alive. His great-grandmother had been a medicine woman before the old ways got pushed aside. Jake, I need to talk to you about some strange things happening up in Haint Hollow, I told him over the phone. There was a long silence. Then Jake said quietly, "What kind of strange things, Isaiah?" I told him about the plant circles, the impossible growth, and the writing in my notebook. When I finished, Jake didn't say anything for a long time. "You need to be careful up there," he finally said. "My great-grandmother told stories about that place, said it was where the ghost medicine grows." Ghost medicine? Plants tended by spirits, the old healers who died bad deaths. They don't rest easy. Sometimes they keep working, keep growing their medicine for people who need help. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Come on, Jake, you don't really believe that." "I believe my great-grandmother. She said there were Cherokee medicine women killed in that hollow, same as the white women folk called witches. All of them died for trying to heal people. Their spirits got unfinished business." After I hung up, I sat, staring at my notebook for a long time. The handwriting looked real. The plant knowledge was detailed and specific. But ghosts writing in my notebook? That was crazy talk, wasn't it? The next morning, I found more writing. This time it was a warning. "Someone comes who needs help. The child burns with fever. Be ready to gather the healing plants when the time comes." I read those words over and over, my coffee getting cold in my hands. A sick child? What child? And how could dead people write messages about the future? But deep down, I was starting to believe something impossible was happening in Haint Hollow. The evidence was right there in black and white, written in handwriting that definitely wasn't mine. I packed my gear again that morning, but this time I felt scared. Whatever was happening in those woods was bigger than strange plant growth. Something was trying to communicate with me, and I wasn't sure I was ready to listen. I started spending every day in Haint Hollow trying to understand what was happening. The plant circles kept multiplying. By my count, there were now over 50 of them scattered through the woods. Each one was perfect, like someone had used a ruler and compass to place every plant. The writing in my notebook continued too. Every night I'd find new entries in that old-fashioned script, recipes for plant medicines I'd never heard of, instructions for gathering herbs at specific times, and warnings about people who would need help. On my 5th day back, I brought a folding chair and decided to just sit and watch. Maybe if I was quiet long enough, I'd see what was making the plants grow so strangely. The afternoon was hot and still. Storm clouds were building again over the mountains, making the air thick and hard to breathe. I sat in my chair at the edge of the largest plant circle and waited. Around 3 o'clock, a mist started rising from the ground. At first I thought it was just humidity from the coming storm, but the mist was too white, too thick, and it smelled like herbs, sage and mint and flowers I couldn't identify. That's when I saw her. A woman appeared in the mist, kneeling in the center of the plant circle. She was wearing a long dress that looked like something from the 1800s, and her hair was braided down her back. In her hands was a woven basket. I tried to stand up, but my legs wouldn't move. I tried to call out, but no sound came from my throat. All I could do was watch as the woman carefully picked plants from the circle, placing each one gently in her basket. She moved like she'd done this 1,000 times before. Her hands knew exactly which plants to choose, which leaves were ready for picking. When her basket was full, she stood up and looked right at me. Her eyes were sad but kind. She was young, maybe 25, with smooth brown skin and Cherokee features. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Instead, she just pointed to my notebook. Then she faded away like smoke in the wind. I sat there for a long time, my heart pounding. Had I really seen a ghost? Or was the heat and stress making me imagine things? That evening, I found new writing in my notebook. I am Ayana, daughter of the Wolf Clan. I gathered healing plants in this hollow until the angry men came. Now I tend the ghost medicine so others may be healed. You have good heart, plant man. Help us. Help the children. The next day, 2 more spirits appeared in the mist. These were white women wearing colonial-style dresses and bonnets. One was middle-aged with gray hair, the other younger with red curls. They worked alongside the Cherokee woman, gathering plants from different circles. I realized I was seeing the murdered healers Jake had told me about. The Cherokee medicine woman and the colonial women accused of witchcraft. In death, they'd found each other and continued their work together. But why were they showing themselves to me? The answer came that same afternoon. I was documenting a new circle when I heard someone crashing through the woods. A man's voice was calling, "Help! Is anyone out here? Please help!" A man stumbled into the hollow carrying a small girl in his arms. The child was maybe 6 years old, and she was burning up with fever. Her face was bright red, and she was breathing in short, quick gasps. "My truck broke down on the fire road," the man panted. "She got sick this morning and keeps getting worse. I was trying to hike out to find help when I heard you moving around in here." I looked at the little girl and felt my heart sink. She was really sick. The kind of sick that could kill a child if it wasn't treated fast. We were 12 miles from the nearest road, hours away from any hospital. That's when the mist started rising again. All 3 spirits appeared at once: Ayana, the Cherokee woman, and the 2 colonial women. They were pointing at different plant circles, then at my notebook. I opened the notebook with shaking hands. New writing had appeared: bloodroot tea to break the fever, wild ginger for her stomach, golden seal to fight the sickness inside, mix with spring water while the father holds her close. The man saw me reading and grabbed my arm. "What is that? Can you help her?" I looked at the spirits, still pointing at their circles. I looked at the sick child, getting worse by the minute. Then I looked at the impossible knowledge written in my notebook. Plant medicine that might save her life. "I think I can help," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "But you have to trust me, and you have to do exactly what I say." The spirits nodded at me from the mist. For the first time since this all started, they looked hopeful instead of sad. It was time to find out if ghost medicine really worked. The little girl was getting worse fast. Her fever was so high she was starting to hake, and her breathing was getting weaker. The man holding her, her father, Tom Bradley, looked scared out of his mind. "What's your daughter's name?" I asked, gathering plants from the circles the spirits pointed to. "Emma," he said, his voice cracking. "She's only 6. She was fine yesterday, and then this morning she just got so sick so fast." The spirits were still visible in the mist, showing me which plants to pick from each circle. Ayana pointed to bloodroot with its white flowers. One of the colonial women showed me wild ginger with its heart-shaped leaves. The other pointed to golden seal with its bright yellow roots. But as I gathered the plants, something strange started happening to me. My hands began moving on their own, like someone else was controlling them. The spirits were getting closer, and I could feel them trying to work through me. "You have willing heart," Ayana's voice whispered in my mind. "Let us help you. Help the child." I felt the colonial women's presence too. "We died for healing others," one of them said inside my head. "Let us finish our work through you." Suddenly, I understood what they wanted. They needed a living person to do the actual work, to make the medicine, to give it to the child. They'd been waiting 19 years for someone like me to come along. But I also felt them trying to take over completely. If I let them in all the way, would I still be me? Or would Isaiah Thornberry disappear forever, leaving just 3 dead healers using my body? "Please," Tom begged, seeing me hesitate. "She's all I have left. Her mother died 2 years ago. I can't lose Emma too." I looked at the little girl burning up with fever. Then I looked at the spirits surrounding me, their hands reaching out like they wanted to touch me. I had to make a choice. "Okay," I said to them. "But we work together. I don't disappear. Deal?" The spirits nod. Tum-tum. I felt their knowledge flow into my mind. Hundreds of years of plant wisdom, healing recipes passed down through generations. But I was still me, still in control of my own body. My hands moved with new skill and certainty. I crushed the bloodroot flowers to make a tea for breaking fevers. I prepared wild ginger to settle Emma's stomach. I cleaned and chopped golden seal root to fight whatever infection was making her so sick. "Hold her close to the spring," I told Tom, following instructions that appeared in my mind. "The water here is special. It'll help the medicine work." Tom carried Emma to the natural spring in the center of the hollow. The water bubbled up clear and cold from deep underground. I mixed the plant medicines with spring water in my metal cup, creating a bitter-smelling tea. "This might taste awful," I warned Emma, kneeling beside her, "but it'll make you feel better." The little girl was so sick she could barely swallow, but we got the medicine down her. Then I made a poultice from the remaining plants and placed it on her chest to help her breathing. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. Emma lay in her father's arms, still burning with fever, still breathing hard. Tom kept looking at me with desperate eyes, and I started to wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake. What if the ghost medicine didn't work? What if the little girl died because I believed in spirits instead of trying to get her to a real hospital? Then Emma's breathing started to slow down. The bright red flush left her cheeks. Her fever broke, and she began to sweat normally instead of burning up. "Daddy?" she whispered, opening her eyes for the first time in hours. "I'm thirsty." Tom started crying with relief. "Oh, thank God, he kept saying, hugging her close. I gave Emma more spring water, and she drank it down eagerly. Within an hour, she was sitting up and asking for food. The transformation was incredible, like watching someone come back from the dead. But while Emma was getting better, the spirits around me were changing too. They looked more soulless, but now more real. And they were still trying to work through me, to use my body for their healing purposes. "Stay with us, Plant Man," Ayana whispered. "Help us heal all who come to the Hollow. We have so much work to do." "Your knowledge of plants is good," one of the colonial women added. "But our knowledge is ancient. Together, we could heal everyone." I felt their pull, their desire to make me part of their eternal work. It would be so easy to just let go, to become their tool for helping others. But I also knew that if I stayed, I'd lose myself completely. The spirits meant well, but they'd been dead so long they'd forgotten what it meant to be alive. "I have to go," I told them, backing away from the spring. "Emma's better now. That's what you wanted, right? To help her?" The spirits looked sad, but understanding. "You choose the living world over the spirit world," Ayana said. "This is wise. But know that we are always here if the need is great." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. "Thank you for saving her." The mist began to fade, and the spirits grew transparent again. But before they disappeared completely, new writing appeared in my notebook. "The child is healed. The medicine gardens remain. Use them with respect, and they will serve those who truly need help." Tom Bradley carried Emma out of the hollow on his shoulders, both of them healthy and happy. I packed my gear and followed them, my mind reeling from everything that had happened. As we reached the edge of the woods, Tom turned back to me. "I don't understand what happened back there," he said, "but you saved my little girl's life. How can I ever thank you?" "Just take care of her," I said. "And maybe don't tell too many people about the ghost medicine. Folks might not understand." Tom nodded. "Your secret's safe with me." That was 30 years ago now. I'm retired from the Forest Service, but I still visit Haint Hollow regularly. The plant circles are still there, still growing medicine that shouldn't be possible. And my notebook still fills with ghostly handwriting when people need help. Over the years, I've used the spirit medicine to help dozens of sick people, hikers who got lost and injured, locals who couldn't afford doctors, children with fevers like Emma's. The spirits never failed me. Their ancient knowledge saved lives that modern medicine might have lost. I became something of a local legend. People started calling me the plant doctor and coming to me with problems their regular doctors couldn't solve. I learned to blend what the spirits taught me with modern botanical science, creating healing methods that worked better than either one alone. The Forest Service officially classified Haint Hollow as a research natural area with restricted access. On paper, it's to protect rare plants. In reality, it's to keep curious people away from the spirit medicine. Some knowledge is too dangerous for those who don't understand it. Emma Bradley grew up to become a nurse. She came to see me a few years ago with her own daughter, a little girl with bright eyes and a curious mind. Emma told me she remembered everything about that day in the hollow: the fever, the strange tea, the feeling of being surrounded by helpful spirits. I always knew there was something special about what you did, she said. Something that went beyond regular medicine. I gave her daughter a small bag of dried herbs from the spirit circles. Nothing dangerous, just plants for minor scrapes and stomach aches. But I also gave her something more important: respect for the old ways of healing. The Cherokee elder Jake Riddle passed away 5 years ago. But before he died, he told me something important. His great-grandmother's spirit had visited him in dreams, he said. She was working alongside Ayana and the colonial women now, all of them tending the ghost medicine together. Death doesn't end a healer's work, Jake told me. It just changes how they do it. I keep detailed records of everything that happens in Haint Hollow. Someday, when I'm too old to make the hike, I'll pass this knowledge on to someone else, someone with the right heart and the right understanding. The spirits will know who to choose, because that's what I learned from the ghost medicine. Healing isn't just about plants or pills or procedures. It's about connection between the living and the dead, between old knowledge and new understanding, between people who need help and people willing to give it. The spirits in Haint Hollow died for practicing their healing arts, but death couldn't stop them from continuing their work. They just had to find new ways to do it. And sometimes, if you know how to listen, the mountains will tell you exactly what they need you to know. My name is Isaiah Thornberry, and I spent 49 years learning about plants. But the most important thing I ever learned came from 3 women who died long before I was born, and who continue healing people long after death should have stopped them. If you ever find yourself in the North Carolina mountains and you hear stories about strange plant circles growing in the deep woods, just remember, not all medicine comes from doctors, and not all healers are alive. Some knowledge is too important to die, even when the people who carry it do. The spirits are still there, still tending their impossible gardens, still waiting to help those who truly need it. You just have to know how to ask, and be brave enough to accept the answer when it comes written in handwriting that isn't your own. My name is Daniel Ashworth, and I've been walking these West Virginia ridges for 16 years now. Started as a park ranger right after my brother Tommy died in the mine collapse back in '71. Figured the mountains above ground were safer than the tunnels below. Shows you how much I knew. I work search and rescue in the Monongahela National Forest, specifically the Dolly Sods Wilderness. It's rough country, thick woods, deep hollows, and trails that can disappear under your feet if you're not careful. In 16 years, I've led 47 successful rescues, lost only 2 people, and both of those were heart attacks we couldn't have prevented anyway. The old-timers around here tell stories. Cherokee spirits in the deep woods, things that hunt in the shadows. They call them the Nunahi, spirit people who steal away anyone who doesn't show proper respect to the mountains. My grandmother used to whisper these tales when I was small, trying to keep me from wandering too far into the hollers. Never believed a word of it. Mountains are dangerous enough without adding ghosts to the mix. That changed in November of 1987. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 3 college kids from Virginia Tech had gone missing while doing some kind of research project. Folk studies, the report said. They were looking into local legends and stories, had permits to camp in the backcountry for a week. They should have checked in Monday. When Tuesday morning came with no word, their professor called it in. The missing students were Sarah Chen, Mark Williams, and Beth Morrison. All seniors, all experienced hikers according to their files. They'd planned to spend 5 days in an area called Bone Gap, a narrow valley between 2 ridges about 18 miles from the nearest paved road. I knew Bone Gap, thick rhododendron bushes, limestone caves, and an old Cherokee burial ground that most folk avoided. Not because of spirits, but because it seemed respectful to leave the dead alone. The weather had been rough, early winter with ice storms and temperatures dropping to 25 degrees at night. Thick fog rolled through the hollows most mornings, making visibility near zero. Not the best conditions for college kids, even smart ones. I loaded my gear and headed out with the volunteer fire department crew. Standard missing persons protocol: establish a base camp, divide into search teams, maintain radio contact every 2 hours. Simple stuff I'd done dozens of times. The drive took 90 minutes on logging roads that barely deserved the name. We set up base camp at the mouth of Bone Gap, where a small creek wound between the ridges. The hollow stretched back maybe 2 miles, getting narrower as it went deeper into the mountains. "You boys take the left ridge," I told the volunteers. "I'll work the valley floor and check their last known camp." The silence hit me first. Not the usual quiet you get in the woods. This was different. Complete. No bird songs, no insect buzzes, no wind rustling through the leaves. Even the creek seemed muted, like someone had wrapped the whole hollow in thick blankets. I found their camp a mile back in the gap. Orange dome tent, perfectly set up. Backpacks organized and clean. A camp stove with a pot of coffee still steaming on the burner. The coffee was hot, fresh, like they'd just poured it and stepped away for a minute. But there were no signs of struggle, no tracks leading away from the camp, no scattered gear or torn fabric, nothing to suggest they'd left in a hurry or that anything had forced them to leave. I called it in on my radio, got nothing but static, tried again, more static with something underneath that almost sounded like voices. Whispers I couldn't quite make out. The compass on my belt was spinning, not jubijus, drifting, spinning like a toy. My GPS unit showed our elevation as negative 200 feet, which was impossible since we were clearly on solid ground. I searched the area around their camp in expanding circles. The ground was soft from recent rain, perfect for holding tracks. But I found nothing. No boot prints, no disturbed leaves, nothing to show 3 people had been living here for several days. That's when I found the first set of impossible tracks. Human footprints, clear as day in a patch of mud near the creek. Size 10 boots, same brand I was wearing. The prints led from the water toward a thick stand of rhododendrons. Halfway across the clearing, they just stopped. Not faded away or got harder to see. Stopped. Like whoever was making them had simply vanished into the air mid-step. I followed my own tracks back to where I'd started, thinking maybe I'd gotten turned around. But my boot prints were still there in the mud, clear and normal. These other tracks were different, deeper, like whoever made them weighed twice what they should. The fog was getting thicker as afternoon wore on. I could barely see 20 feet in any direction. The silence pressed against my eardrums like being underwater. Something was wrong in Bone Gap, real wrong, but I didn't believe in spirits. Not yet. I spent the night at base camp waiting for the fog to clear. The volunteers had found nothing on the ridges. No tracks, no signs, no response to their calls. It was like the 3 students had never existed, but I knew better. That hot coffee didn't make itself. Wednesday morning brought clearer skies, but no better luck. I brought in a state police K9 unit, 2 German shepherds with handlers who'd worked hundreds of cases. Dogs can find scents days old, sometimes weeks if conditions are right. The dogs wouldn't enter Bone Gap. Not couldn't, wouldn't. Both animals took one sniff of the air at the mouth of the hollow and started whimpering. Hair standing up, tails between their legs, backing away from something I couldn't see or smell. "Never seen them act like this," said Handler Murphy, a 20-year veteran. "It's like they're scared of the place itself." We tried coaxing them, used treats, commands, even tried carrying them partway in. Nothing worked. The closer we got to the hollow, the more panicked they became. That's when I heard the voices. Faint at first. Coming from deep in the gap, maybe a mile back toward the caves. 3 people calling for help. Young voices. Desperate. "Sarah! Mark! Beth!" I shouted back. The voices stopped. I waited. Called again. Nothing. The dog handlers heard it too. We all agreed. Someone was alive back there, probably injured or trapped. We left the dogs with one handler and the rest of us went in on foot. The deeper we went into Bone Gap, the colder it got. Not just November cold, but something that bit right through your jacket and settled in your bones. Our breath came out in thick white clouds, even though it had been nearly 50 degrees at base camp. We found more impossible tracks. Dozens of them now, crisscrossing the hollow floor in patterns that made no sense. Boot prints that appeared and disappeared without warning. Tracks that led straight up tree trunks or vanished at the edge of solid rock walls. And we found the cairns. Stone piles, Dozens of them scattered through the woods, each about 3 feet high and built from rocks that didn't belong. Smooth river stones in an area with no rivers. White limestone in forests of dark sandstone. Each cairn perfectly balanced, like they'd been built by an expert. "These weren't here yesterday," I told Murphy. "I searched this whole area." "Maybe the students built them," he suggested. But I could see fresh dirt around the bases. These cairns had been built during the night, in complete darkness, in silence so thick we would have heard a pin drop from 100 yards away. We followed a game trail toward the back of the hollow. The voices came again, clearer now. 3 people calling my name. "Daniel, help us! We're trapped!" My blood went cold. I hadn't told anyone my first name except Murphy, and he was right beside me. The missing students had never met me. How could they know what to call? "This way!" The voice was definitely Sarah Chen. I'd heard her on the voicemail she'd left for her professor. Same accent, same tone, but the voice was coming from underground, directly beneath our feet. I got down on my hands and knees, pressing my ear to the forest floor. Solid dirt and rock, no caves, no hollow spaces, but I could hear them down there, maybe 10 feet below, moving around and talking to each other. "Can you hear us?" Sarah's voice, muffled but clear. "We fell through something. It's dark down here. So dark." Murphy was backing away. "This isn't right, Ashworth. This isn't natural." I tried my radio. Static. But underneath the white noise I could hear other voices. Dozens of them. Some speaking English, others in languages I didn't recognize. All of them calling for help. All of them sounding like they were trapped somewhere far away. That's when I noticed my own boot prints. Fresh tracks in the mud, leading away from where I stood. Size 11 Danners, same as I was wearing. But these tracks led to places I'd never been. Areas of the hollow I hadn't searched yet. I followed them, leaving Murphy behind. The impossible tracks led me through thick rhododendrons to a small clearing I'd never seen before. In the center stood an old stone circle, maybe 15 feet across. The rocks were covered in symbols I didn't recognize, but they looked ancient, old enough to predate any Cherokee settlements in the area. My boot prints led straight to the edge of the circle and stopped. But inside the circle, the ground was wrong. Not solid earth, but something that seemed to shimmer and shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. Like the surface of dark water, but dry to the touch. I threw a stone into the center of the circle. Instead of hitting the ground, it seemed to sink through whatever was there. No sound of impact, just gone. The voices started again, louder now. Not just Sarah, Mark, and Beth, but others. Dozens of others. Men, women, children. All calling for help from somewhere beneath my feet. I ran. Left Murphy. Left the search team. Ran all the way back to base camp without stopping. Told everyone the weather was getting bad and we'd have to suspend the search until morning. But I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those voices, and I kept thinking about my boot prints leading to places I'd never been. Something was hunting in Bone Gap. Something that could steal your tracks, your voice, maybe even your memories. And it wasn't done with us yet. Thursday morning brought news that made my blood run cold. Another person was missing. Jamie Fletcher, 17 years old, had gone looking for the college students on his own. Local boy who knew the woods almost as well as I did. His truck was found parked at the old logging road, but no sign of Jamie. 4 people now. All missing in the same impossible way. I went back to Bone Gap alone. Told my supervisor I was following a lead, which was partly true. The lead was my growing certainty that something ancient and hungry was living in that hollow. The stone circle was still there, but it had changed. The symbols carved in the rocks were deeper now, like they'd been freshly cut. And the shimmer in the center was stronger, more visible. Looking at it too long made my eyes water and my head spin. I heard Jamie's voice first. "Mr. Ashworth? Is that you?" Coming from directly beneath the circle, clear as if he was standing next to me. "Jamie? Where are you, son?" "I'm down here with the others. We're in some kind of cave, I think, but the walls, they're not rock. There's something else, something that moves." I got on my hands and knees at the edge of the circle. The ground felt solid, but I could hear them all down there. 4 voices now. talking to each other in the darkness. "How long have we been here?" That was Mark, the college boy. "Hard to tell," Sarah answered. "Time feels different, like we've been here forever, but also like we just arrived." "I'm so tired," Beth whispered. "So tired I can barely keep my eyes open." Jamie's voice was weaker than the others. "Something's been feeding on us. I can feel it. Every hour we get a little more tired, a little less ourselves." That's when I saw it. A shadow moving at the edge of my vision. Tall, maybe 8 feet, but wrong somehow. Like someone had taken a person and stretched them in directions that shouldn't exist. When I turned to look directly at it, it was gone. But I could feel it watching me. I tried to leave the circle, but my feet wouldn't move. Not stuck exactly. More like I'd forgotten how to control my own legs. The shadow moved again, closer this time, and with it came a cold that went deeper than winter. The thing spoke without words, not in my ears, but directly into my mind. "You have walked my mountain for many years, Ranger. You have taken good care of the trees and streams, but you have brought others here, others who do not respect the old agreements." Images flooded my head. The Cherokee people, hundreds of years ago, making some kind of deal with this thing. They would leave offerings, food, tools, sometimes people, and in return it would protect the mountain from greater evils, things that lived in the deep caves, in the spaces between worlds. But the Cherokee had been driven away. The offerings stopped. The thing grew hungry, angry, desperate. Every 30 years I must feed. The mountain grows thin without nourishment. The barriers weaken. If I do not eat, things far worse than me will come through. More images, creatures of shadow and teeth, things that would make this spirit look friendly by comparison. An army of nightmares held back only by this guardian's strength. The young ones who came to study our stories, they did not show respect. They laughed at the old ways, took pictures of sacred places, stole artifacts from the burial ground. I saw it then. Sarah, Mark, and Beth ransacking the Cherokee burial site, posing for pictures with ancient pottery, making jokes about primitive superstitions. They hadn't meant any real harm, but harm was what they'd caused. And the boy who came after, he brought iron into sacred spaces, cold iron that burns and weakens the barriers. Jamie's truck keys, his belt buckle, the steel thermos he always carried, things that were poisonous to whatever this creature was. But you, Ranger, you have served faithfully. You understand sacrifice. Your brother died in the deep places, didn't he? You know what it means to lose someone to feed the hunger of the earth. The shadow was fully visible now. Not quite human, not quite animal. Ancient beyond measure, tired in a way that went deeper than flesh and bone. It wasn't evil, I realized. Just desperate. A guardian doing its job the only way it knew how. "I will make you a bargain, Daniel Ashworth. I will return the 4, but something must take their place. The mountain must be fed." "Take me," I said without thinking. "Let them go, and take me instead." The thing laughed, and the sound was like wind through empty caves. "You misunderstand, Ranger. I do not want your life. I want your years, your strength, your time. Give me 20 years of your days, and they can go free. But you will remain as guardian. You will watch these places and turn away those who would disturb them." 20 years. I was 39. That would make me 59 in an instant, if I survived at all. But 4 lives for 20 years of mine? It wasn't even a choice. Deal. The world exploded into light and pain and the sound of rushing water. I felt myself falling, not down, but sideways, through spaces that existed between seconds. When I hit the ground, everything went black. I woke up in the hospital in Elkins 3 days later. The doctor said I'd been found unconscious in Bone Gap by the search team, severely hypothermic and dehydrated. No sign of trauma, no obvious cause for my collapse. just exhaustion and exposure. But I knew better. Looking in the bathroom mirror showed me the price I'd paid. My hair had gone completely white. Deep lines marked my face, and my hands looked like they belonged to a man 20 years older. Which I suppose they did. The 4 missing people had been found alive and unharmed in a cave system 3 miles from where they'd originally disappeared. All 4 claimed they remembered nothing after the first night in Bone Gap. Search teams swore the caves had been thoroughly explored multiple times without finding any sign of them. The official report blamed exposure and hypothermia-induced hallucinations. The media called it a miracle survival story. The families just wanted their kids back alive and didn't ask too many questions about the details. But I knew the truth, and I knew my job wasn't finished. I went back to Bone Gap alone 1 week after getting out of the hospital. The stone circle was gone, or at least invisible. The strange tracks had vanished. The cairns had tumbled into random piles of ordinary rocks. But I could feel it watching. The Guardian. My new partner in protecting something most people would never understand. You held to the bargain, Ranger. The young ones are free. But remember, every 30 years, the mountain grows hungry. Not everyone who enters these places will be as lucky as you're 4. I understand, I said to the empty air. How will I know when it's time? You will know. The signs will come. And when they do, you must guide the disrespectful ones away. Turn them towards safer paths. Some will listen. Others... The presence faded, leaving me alone in the hollow with my new understanding of what it meant to serve something larger than yourself. I walked the ridges that day, seeing the forest with eyes that were both older and younger than before. I could sense things now. Thin places where other worlds pressed close to ours. Ancient paths that led to destinations no map could show. Spirits that moved through the trees like old friends, no longer hidden from my sight. The mountains were alive in ways I'd never imagined, and something had to stand guard, making sure the balance was maintained, that someone, for the next 30 years at least, was me. I'm 58 now, though my body carries the weight of 78 years. Still working as a park ranger, still leading search and rescue operations. But my real job is different. I've turned away dozens of people from Bone Gap and other sensitive areas. Photographers looking for Cherokee artifacts. Ghost hunters with their electronic equipment. College students doing research projects that show no real respect for what they're studying. Most listen when I suggest alternative locations. A few get angry and try to sneak in anyway. Those are the ones I have to watch most carefully. I've learned to read the signs. When the barriers grow thin, the woods get quiet in that unnatural way. Animals act strange, compasses spin without reason, and deep in the hollows, shadows move that shouldn't exist. 3 times in 19 years, I've had to make hard choices. People who wouldn't be turned away from places they had no business exploring. People whose disrespect and greed made them dangerous to everyone else. I led them to safe paths and told them the dangerous ones were closed. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it wasn't. The Guardian doesn't take everyone. Only those who truly threaten the balance. But when it does feed, it grows stronger. The barriers hold. The things that live in the deep places stay where they belong. 11 years from now, it will be time for the mountain to feed again. A full cycle, 30 years since Sarah, Mark, Beth, and Jamie Dissa appeared for 3 days. I'll be almost 70 by then if I live that long. Maybe by then I'll have found someone else to take over. Someone who understands that some places are older and more important than human convenience. Someone who can make the hard choices when lives hang in the balance. Or maybe I'll serve another term. Give another 20 years to keep the barriers strong and the ancient agreements honored. I've made peace with it either way. The mountains are beautiful, but they're not safe. They're not tame. They remember things that happened long before our great-great-grandfathers were born, and they demand respect. Some places in these Appalachian forests are older than human memory. Thin spots where other worlds bleed through. If you ever find yourself in the deep woods of West Virginia, and the silence gets too thick, and the shadows start moving wrong, turn around, walk away, find another path. Trust me on this one. I've been walking these ridges for 35 years now, and I know what lives in the hollow places. Some things are better left alone. My name is Daniel Ashworth, and I've seen the price of forgetting that the mountains have their own rules. Don't make the same mistake those college kids made. Show respect. Keep to the marked trails. And if you hear voices calling from underground, don't follow them. Some bargains can't be undone, and some hungers can never be fully satisfied. The mountain remembers, and it's always watching. My name is Tobias Ashfield, and I've been a park ranger at Mount Mitchell for 17 years. That's long enough to see plenty of strange things on this mountain, but nothing prepared me for what I found in those old artist cabins. People call me Toby. I'm 40 years old, used to be a paramedic before I took this job. The mountains called to me after too many years of city emergencies and folks who wouldn't listen to common sense. Up here at 6,684 feet, you learn real quick that nature doesn't care about your plans. The weather can change from sunny to deadly in 20 minutes. I've pulled 156 people off this mountain over the years, some alive, some not. I keep a weather station up here, take pictures of the wildlife, and document how the old Appalachian ways are slowly disappearing. Photography is my hobby, though I never thought much about art beyond that. Seemed like something for city folks with too much time on their hands. March 1979 was one of those weird late winter months where you'd wake up to fog so thick you couldn't see your own hands. Then by afternoon, the sun would burn it off and you'd be down to shirt sleeves. Nights still dropped to 15 degrees, though. Dangerous time for hikers who didn't respect the mountain. That's when the reports started coming in. 3 different groups of hikers mentioned finding old paintings in the abandoned artist colony buildings. Not just any paintings, pictures that showed their own hiking accidents before they happened. One guy swore he saw a painting of himself falling off a ledge, complete with the exact clothes he was wearing. Another woman said she found a picture of her friend getting lost in fog, painted in a cabin that had been empty for 50 years. I figured it was just mountain fever. Altitude stress and too much imagination can make you see all sorts of things. Plus, folks love a good ghost story, but I had to check it out. That's my job. Visitor safety means investigating every report, no matter how crazy it sounds. The old artist colony sits about a half-mile from the summit, tucked into a grove of spruce trees that stayed green all winter. Back in the 1920s, a group of painters set up there, claiming the thin mountain air gave them visions of things that hadn't happened yet. Most folks thought they were just odd city types looking for inspiration. The colony lasted about 5 years before everyone packed up and left. Nobody talked much about why. I'd been up there plenty of times over the years. Just a cluster of small wooden cabins, windows mostly broken, roofs sagging under decades of snow. Nothing special. The state kept meaning to tear them down, but there was always something more important to spend money on. Walking up there that March morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Like when I was a kid and had to walk past the old cemetery at night. That prickly feeling on the back of your neck, like someone was watching. The fog was thick, muffling sound, making the familiar trail feel strange. I told myself it was just the weather. The first cabin I checked looked normal enough. Broken furniture, mouse droppings, the usual decay you'd expect. But in the second cabin, I found them. 3 oil paintings, propped against the far wall like someone had just finished working on them. The paint still looked wet, which was impossible. These buildings had been empty for decades. The first painting showed a young man in modern hiking gear, the kind of high-tech stuff that didn't exist in the 1920s. He was lying at the bottom of a rocky slope, his leg bent wrong, face twisted in pain. Every detail was perfect, down to the brand name on his boots. The second showed a woman in a yellow raincoat, wandering lost in thick fog. Her face was scared, mouth open, like she was calling for help. The fog in the painting seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at it. The third painting made my blood go cold. It was me. I was wearing my ranger uniform, the same one I had on right then. In the painting, I was kneeling next to someone lying on the ground, doing CPR. The person's face was turned away, but I could see blood on the rocks nearby. My painted face looked desperate, like I was fighting to save a life I was about to lose. I've never believed in fortune tellers or crystal balls or any of that nonsense. But staring at that painting, I felt something I hadn't felt since my first day as a paramedic. Pure, cold fear. I pulled out my camera to take pictures for my report. The flash went off, but when I looked at the camera, the display showed nothing but static. I tried again. Same thing. My radio crackled with voices, but not current dispatch calls. These sounded like old emergency reports, voices I didn't recognize talking about accidents that happened years ago. I backed out of the cabin, telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe some art students were playing an elaborate prank. Maybe the altitude was getting to me more than usual. Maybe the paintings weren't really that detailed, and my mind was filling in things that weren't there. But when I looked back at the cabin, I swear I saw a figure moving around inside. A man in old-fashioned clothes, standing in front of an easel, painting. The cabin was empty when I looked again. I checked the other buildings, working fast now, wanting to finish and get back down the mountain. Most were empty, but in the largest cabin, the one that must have been a common workspace, I found something that made me forget about logical explanations. The walls were covered with paintings, dozens of them, all showing accidents, rescues, disasters on the mountain. I recognized some of the scenes. They were rescues I'd been part of over the years. But these paintings looked old, painted long before those accidents happened. There was the rock slide from 1975 that killed 2 climbers, the lost child from 1977 that we found after 3 days of searching, the lightning strike from last summer that I'd barely survived myself. All of it painted in the same old-fashioned style, with the same impossible attention to detail. In the corner, I found an artist's journal. The leather cover was cracked with age, but the pages inside were readable. The handwriting was shaky, like someone had been painting with trembling hands. The visions come stronger now. The mountain shows me what will be. I paint what I see, hoping someone will understand, will be able to change what's coming. But the spirits say some things are fixed. Some things must happen so that other things can be prevented. The Cherokee knew this place was special. Vision Quest site, they called it. Warriors would come here to see the battles they would fight. Now it shows me different battles. Against cold, against falling rock, against time running out while someone dies and help is too far away. I am not the first to see. I will not be the last. The mountain chooses who will carry the burden of knowing. The journal was dated 1924. But the last entry was different. Fresh ink, written in handwriting I recognized, because I saw it every day when I filled out incident reports. It was my handwriting, and it said, "Today I understand. The paintings show what must happen so worse things don't. But the price is seeing your own future, knowing which rescue will be your last." I dropped the journal and ran. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that painting of myself doing CPR on someone I couldn't save. I told myself it was stress, too much caffeine, mountain air playing tricks on my mind. But when dispatch called at dawn with an emergency, hiker with a broken leg at the bottom of Rough Creek Trail, my hands shook as I grabbed my gear. The victim was the young man from the first painting. Same face, same hiking gear, same twisted leg. Even the rocks looked exactly the same. "How did you get here so fast?" he asked when I reached him. "I just fell 5 minutes ago. Nobody else even knows I'm hurt." I didn't have an answer for that. 3 days later, the woman in the yellow raincoat got lost in fog near the summit. We found her exactly where the painting said we would, scared and calling for help. She swore she hadn't told anyone where she was hiking. That's when I knew the paintings weren't predictions. They were instructions. I went back to the colony, this time with backup. Jim Parker, another ranger who'd been on the mountain almost as long as me. I figured having a witness would help me stay rational. But when we reached the main cabin, Jim stopped dead at the doorway. "Jesus, Toby, how long have these been here?" "The paintings? Since at least the 1920s, according to..." "No." Jim's voice was quiet. Strange. "That painting. The one in the middle." I looked where he was pointing. A new painting had appeared, still wet, propped right in the center of the wall. It showed both of us, standing in that exact spot, staring at the paintings. But in the picture, something was standing behind us. Something tall and dark, with eyes that reflected light like an animal's. "Jim," I said slowly, "turn around real slow and tell me what you see." "Nothing, just trees and fog." "Why?" But I could feel it. That watching presence I'd felt before, stronger now, closer. The hair on my arm stood up. My breath came out in puffs even though the day was warm. "We need to leave. Now." "Wait, I want to look at these other—" Jim never finished the sentence. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Frost formed on the windows. And in the sudden silence, we heard the sound of brush on canvas, paint being mixed on a palette. The ghost was painting again. We turned to run and found ourselves face to face with an elderly Cherokee man in traditional dress. His eyes held the deep darkness of mountain caves, and when he looked at me, I felt like he was seeing not just who I was, but who I had been and who I would become. "Tobias Ashfield," he said, though his lips didn't seem to move. 17 years you have served this mountain. 17 years you have saved lives. But the mountain has greater work for you." Jim had gone pale, backing toward the door. But something kept me frozen in place. "You've been showing me the future," I said, "making me save people by painting their accidents before they happen." The spirit nodded. The Cherokee called this place Nvi Atsila, the Vision Mountain. Warriors came here to see the battles they must fight. Now the mountain shows different battles. Against weather, against gravity, against the clock when death comes calling. Why me? Because you understand the price of saving lives. Because you have the skills to act on what the visions show. Because the mountain has chosen you to carry this burden. Behind the spirit, I could see the easel more clearly now. The painting on it showed Mount Mitchell's summit crowded with tourists, families with children, elderly couples, groups of young hikers, and above them, a massive section of the mountain face, cracked and ready to fall. "When?" I whispered. 3 days, unless you act on what you've seen." The painting showed the date clearly, March 15th. That was the day the state was planning a big publicity event for the park. Media, politicians, hundreds of visitors. If that rock slide happened, how many will die? The spirit's eyes were infinitely sad. Too many, unless you become what the mountain needs you to be. And if I refuse, then you remain as you are, a man who saves one life at a time, always arriving too late for the rest. Jim grabbed my arm. "Toby, we need to get out of here. This is crazy. Ghosts don't exist. Dead Cherokee shamans don't paint pictures of the future." Bushy. But I was looking at all those paintings on the walls, all those rescues I'd made over the years, all those lives I'd saved because I'd been in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. How many times had I told other rangers I had a feeling about where to find lost hikers? How often had I changed patrol routes at the last minute because something told me to check a different area? I'd always thought it was experience, instinct, luck. Maybe it had been something else all along. "What do you want from me?" I asked the spirit. "Partnership, your skills, my sight. Together, we can prevent tragedies, not just respond to them." "At what cost?" The spirit gestured to the painting of the rock slide. "See for yourself." The image began to move like a movie. I watched families fleeing as tons of rock crashed down, saw children separated from parents in the panic, saw the rescue teams, including myself, arriving to find dozens dead, many more injured. The mountain's reputation destroyed, the park closed, my career over because I hadn't been able to prevent it. Then the scene changed. I saw myself 3 days earlier, somehow knowing about the danger. Saw me convincing officials to cancel the event, evacuating the area. The rock slide still happened, but it fell on empty ground. No one died. "How?" I asked. "Accept the partnership. Let me share the visions with you directly, not just through paintings." But know this: once you see the future clearly, you cannot unsee it. You will know not just when disasters will happen, but when they cannot be prevented. You will know which rescue will be your last. I thought about that painting of myself doing CPR on someone I couldn't save. You mean I'll know when I'm going to die? You will know when your work is finished. Jim was pulling harder on my arm now. Toby, come on. This isn't real. You're talking to empty air. But I could see the spirit clearly. And I could see something else. A faint glow around Jim's body. And numbers floating above his head. His heart rate, blood pressure, stress indicators. The beginning of vision sight. If I say no, what happens to the paintings? They remain. Others will find them eventually. But without someone who understands their purpose, most of the warnings will go unheeded. The mountain will continue to take its toll, one life at a time. I looked at all those paintings again, all those people I'd saved because I'd been exactly where I needed to be, exactly when I needed to be there. Maybe I'd been in partnership with this spirit for years without knowing it. And if I say yes, you become what you have always been, but with full knowledge of your purpose. You save not just those the mountain shows you, but everyone you can reach in time. The spirit held out his hand. Choose, Tobias Ashfield. Will you serve the mountain with open eyes or continue stumbling in partial darkness? I thought about all the families I'd helped reunite, all the close calls that had ended well because I'd been there, all the times I'd felt guided by something beyond my own experience. I thought about the rock slide 3 days away, and all those people who would die if I walked away now. I reached out and took the spirit's hand. The world exploded into light and vision. I saw the mountain's history stretching back thousands of years, Cherokee warriors seeking guidance, early settlers who didn't understand the warnings, modern visitors who ignored the signs of danger. I saw every accident that had happened, every life that had been lost, every near miss that had been prevented by someone being in the right place at exactly the right time. And I saw the future, not just the next few days, but months and years ahead. Storms that would strand hikers, equipment failures that would turn routine climbs into rescues, medical emergencies that would require split-second timing to prevent deaths. I saw my own future too. Years of successful rescues, a reputation as someone who always seemed to know exactly where to be. And eventually, yes, that final rescue attempt. But not for years yet. And when it came, it would be worth it. The person I couldn't save would be me, but the 5 people I'd rescue first would live full lives because of that sacrifice. When the visions faded, I was back in the cabin. Jim was staring at me, concerned. You okay? You spaced out there for a minute. Yeah, I'm fine. Better than fine. I looked around the cabin. The paintings were still there, but they looked different now. Older, faded, historical artifacts rather than active warnings. We need to get back. I have some phone calls to make. Phone calls? That publicity event on the 15th? It needs to be canceled. And we need to get a geological survey team up here to check the stability of the north face. Jim stared at me. How could you possibly know? Trust me on this one, Jim. Sometimes the mountain tells you things. The rock slide happened exactly as the painting had shown at 2:47 p.m. on March 15th. But instead of hitting hundreds of tourists, it fell on an empty viewing area that had been temporarily closed for safety inspection based on my emergency recommendation. The geological survey team found the fractures I'd told them to look for. The state engineers were amazed that I'd spotted structural problems that their equipment had initially missed. My report about unusual rock movement patterns observed during routine patrols became required reading for park safety officers throughout the region. Nobody questioned how I'd known. Rangers develop a reputation for having good instincts about their territory. In my case, those instincts just got a lot more specific. The artist colony was officially condemned and sealed off, supposedly for structural safety reasons. The paintings were cataloged as historically significant folk art depicting local accidents and stored in the state archives. The researchers who studied them never could explain the unusual mineral pigments or why some of the scenes matched accident reports feel. Decades after the paintings were supposedly created. I still work Mount Mitchell. My rescue record over the past few months has been unprecedented. Not just the number of lives saved, but the way I always seem to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Other rangers joke that I must be psychic. They have no idea how close to the truth that is. The visions come regularly now, usually in dreams, sometimes as sudden flashes while I'm on patrol. I see accidents before they happen, weather changes that will strand hikers, equipment failures that will turn routine activities into emergencies. Not all of them can be prevented, but more can be avoided than most people realize. I've started taking more photographs during my patrols, documenting not just the wildlife and scenery, but the subtle signs that predict trouble. Changes in animal behavior before storms, rock formations that show stress patterns, vegetation changes that indicate unstable soil. I'm building a database of warning signs that other rangers can use. Sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the ranger station, I can feel the Cherokee spirit's presence. Not threatening now, but companionable, like an old partner checking in on how the work is going. The mountain takes care of those who take care of others, he told me once. I'm beginning to understand what that means. Other parks have started asking me to consult on their safety protocols. There are places throughout the Appalachians where the old Cherokee vision sites still hold power. Places where creative people, artists, writers, musicians, sometimes tap into something beyond normal perception and create works that show more than they should be able to see. Most of them don't understand what they're experiencing. They just know that sometimes inspiration comes from somewhere outside themselves, bringing knowledge they shouldn't have. But a few, the sensitive ones, realize they're seeing glimpses of things that haven't happened yet. I help them when I can, teach them to trust the visions, to find ways to act on the warnings without sounding crazy. There's a network of us now, spread across the mountains, all serving the same purpose in different ways. My name is Tobias Ashfield, and I've been a park ranger at Mount Mitchell for 17 years. But I've been working with the mountain itself for longer than that, even when I didn't know it. The spirits of this place have been trying to protect people for thousands of years. They just needed someone with the right skills and the willingness to listen. If you ever visit Mount Mitchell, pay attention to the signs. The mountain will tell you things if you know how to look. And if you see paintings or artwork that show things too clearly, that know too much about places they shouldn't, well, just remember that sometimes the mountain shows you what's coming, so you'll have time to get out of the way. The Cherokee knew the power of vision quests. Sometimes the visions aren't just for the person seeking them. Sometimes they're warnings meant to save everyone else. My name is Jeremiah Wolfsbane, and I've been a ranger in Daniel Boone National Forest for 12 years. Folks always ask about the name. It means appointed by God to repel the wolf. My grandfather gave it to me, said it would keep the bad things away. Wish I'd listened closer to what he meant by that. I work the backcountry patrol, specializing in illegal drug operations. You'd be surprised how many folks think they can hide their cannabis grows in the deep woods. In 12 years, I've arrested 34 operations and found 89 missing persons. Most of them walked out alive. Most of them. January 1989 hit Kentucky like a sledgehammer. The temperature dropped to 15 below zero, and snow blocked every access road for 20 miles. I grew up in coal country, so cold doesn't scare me much. My daddy worked the mines until black lung took him, and he always said the cold was honest. It told you straight up it wanted to kill you. The Red River Gorge is beautiful country, even in winter. Sandstone cliffs rise up like ancient castles, and hidden caves wind back into the earth for miles. Ice covers the waterfalls, making them look like frozen tears on the rock face. It's the kind of place that makes you feel small, like you're walking through God's cathedral. But that January, something felt wrong. I first noticed it driving the back roads, checking on the few cabins scattered through the gorge. The woods were too quiet. Usually you'd see deer tracks, maybe a fox crossing the road. but there was nothing. Even the birds seemed to have left. The silence felt heavy, like it was pressing down on the trees. My radio crackled as I pulled up to what we called the Henderson place, an old cabin that squatters used sometimes. Unit 47, this is dispatch. We've got a tip about activity at your location. Copy dispatch. Checking it out now. The cabin sat in a hollow between two ridges surrounded by bare oak trees. Smoke should have been coming from the chimney in weather like this, but the place looked cold and dead. I grabbed my service weapon and approached carefully. The front door hung open, swaying in the wind. That's when I smelled it. It wasn't the usual smell of an old cabin, dust and mice and rotting wood. This was something else, something that made my stomach turn and my mouth water at the same time, like meat that had been left out too long, but also like the best barbecue you ever smelled. Inside the cabin, I found the drug operation, tables covered with processing equipment, bags of dried cannabis, scales, and packaging materials. But that wasn't what made me call for backup. Blood covered everything. Not just drops or splashes, but pools of it, dried black on the wooden floor. Drag marks led from the main room toward the back of the cabin. On one table, next to the drug scales, I found something that made my hands shake. Bones. Human bones, picked clean and stacked neat as firewood. Some of them had marks on them, teeth marks. But the teeth that made those marks weren't quite human. They were too big, too sharp. I keyed my radio with trembling fingers. Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need state police and the coroner out here. We've got multiple homicides. Copy, Unit 47. How many victims? I looked around the cabin again, counting the bones, seeing the blood. I don't know yet. Maybe 5, maybe more. And dispatch, call the DEA too. This wasn't just a drug operation. While I waited for backup, I walked around the cabin looking for clues. That's when I found the footprints in the snow behind the building. They started out normal, boot prints from several different people. But as I followed them toward the tree line, they changed. The prints got longer, deeper. Instead of boot treads, I saw what looked like bare feet. But feet that stretched out too far, with marks in the snow that looked like claws instead of toenails. I'd seen a lot of strange things in 12 years of ranger work. People do crazy things when they're scared or desperate or high on drugs. But I'd never seen anything like this. The wind picked up as the sun started to set, making the bare branches rattle like old bones. I shivered and told myself it was just the cold. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something had been here. Something that wasn't quite human anymore. State Police Detective Sarah Chen arrived 2 hours after my call, along with the coroner and 3 DEA agents. Chen was good people, smart, thorough, and she didn't talk down to local law enforcement like some of the feds did. "What do you think happened here, Wolfsbane?" she asked, stepping carefully around the bloodstains. "Honestly, I have no idea. Could be the drug operation went bad. Maybe they turned on each other. But I've never seen anything like those bite marks." Dr. Martinez, the coroner, was examining the bones with a magnifying glass. He looked up with a troubled expression. "These marks, they're definitely human teeth. But look at the spacing." He pointed to deep grooves in a thigh bone. "The canines are too far apart, and they're much larger than normal." "Could be someone filed their teeth," suggested Agent Rodriguez from the DEA. "Some gang initiation thing." "Maybe," Dr. Martinez said, but he didn't sound convinced. "But the jaw strength required to make these marks, we're talking about bite force that's almost superhuman." We spent the rest of the daylight hours documenting the scene. The drug operation was sophisticated. They'd been processing marijuana here for months, maybe longer. But something had gone very wrong very quickly. The equipment was abandoned mid-process, like everyone had just vanished. Chen found a wallet in the corner, partially chewed. "Marcus Webb, age 23, from Lexington. This might be one of our victims." "Might be," I said. "But where's the rest of him?" As the sun went down, the temperature dropped, even further. My breath came out in white puffs, and the windows of the cabin started to ice over. The DEA agents were setting up portable heaters, but the cold seemed to seep through everything. That's when we heard the first howl. It came from deep in the woods, echoing off the sandstone cliffs. Not quite wolf, not quite human. It rose and fell like a siren, making the hair on my arms stand up. "Coyotes?" Chen asked, but her hand moved to her service weapon. "Never heard a coyote sound like that," I said. "And they don't usually hunt in weather this cold." The howl came again, closer this time. Then another one answered from a different direction, and another. "We're surrounded," Agent Rodriguez whispered. I shook my head. "No, it's the same one. The echo off these cliffs makes it sound like more." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. Dr. Martinez was packing up his equipment when he found something else. "There's another set of remains here," he called from the back room. "But this one's different." We crowded around as he showed us what looked like human bones, but twisted and elongated. The arm bones were too long, the skull stretched out in ways that didn't seem possible. "Genetic disorder?" Chen suggested. "Or drug effects," said Agent Rodriguez. "I've seen what some of these synthetic compounds can do to people. But I was thinking about something else. Something my grandfather used to tell me when I was little. Stories about the old days when the Cherokee lived in these mountains. Stories about hungry spirits that came in the hard winters, when people got so desperate they'd do anything to survive." "We need to get out of here," I said suddenly. "What?" Chen looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "We're not done processing the scene." The howl came again, so close it seemed to be right outside the cabin. The sound went through me like ice water, and for just a second, I felt something else, a hunger so deep and desperate it made me dizzy. "I'm serious," I said. "We need to leave, now." That's when Agent Rodriguez screamed. He was standing by the window, looking out into the darkness. His face was white, his eyes wide with terror. "There's something out there," he whispered. "Something big." We all rushed to the window, pressing our faces against the cold glass. At first, I didn't see anything but snow and bare trees. Then a shadow moved between the trunks, too tall to be human, too thin to be a bear. It stopped about 50 yards from the cabin and turned toward us. In the reflected light from our portable heaters, I saw eyes that glowed yellow like a cat's. But the face around those eyes was wrong, stretched out with a mouth too wide and teeth too sharp. "What the hell is that?" Chen breathed. Before anyone could answer, the creature threw back its head and howled again. This time, I felt something answer from deep inside me. A hunger. A craving for fresh meat that was so strong I had to grab the windowsill to keep from falling. The creature looked right at me through the glass, and I swear it smiled. We barricaded ourselves in the cabin that night, but I don't think any of us really slept. The thing in the woods kept circling just out of sight. Sometimes we'd hear branches breaking or snow crunching under heavy feet. Sometimes we'd see those glowing eyes, reflecting our lights. "We should call for backup," Agent Rodriguez said for the 10th time. "Radio's not working," I told him. "Something about the gorge walls interferes with the signal. We'll have to wait until morning and hike out." Dr. Martinez was studying the bones again by flashlight. "I've been thinking about these bite marks," he said. "What if they weren't made by different people? What if one person made all of them, but their teeth kept growing?" "That's impossible," Chen said. "Is it? Look at this sequence." He laid out several bones in order. The first ones show normal human bite marks. Then they get bigger, deeper. By the end, we're looking at teeth the size of a wolf's fangs. I thought about my grandfather's stories again, about people who got so hungry during the hard winters that they started eating things they shouldn't eat, and how that hunger changed them, made them into something that wasn't human anymore. "There's something I need to tell you," I said, "about this place." I told them about the Cherokee burial ground that was supposed to be somewhere in this area, about the winter of 1847, when a group of pioneers got snowed in and didn't all make it to spring, about the stories my grandfather told of hungry spirits that could possess people, make them crave human flesh. You're talking about Wendigos, Dr. Martinez said quietly. I've heard those legends. Legends, Agent Rodriguez snorted. We're dealing with drug dealers, not monsters. That's when we heard the scream. It came from outside, high and desperate. A woman's voice calling for help. Please, somebody help me, I'm hurt. Agent Rodriguez moved toward the door. Someone's out there. Don't, I said, grabbing his arm. That's not human. You're crazy. That's clearly a person in distress. Please, the voice called again. I can't feel my legs. Help me. Chen was looking through the window with binoculars. I can see her, she said. About 100 yards out. She's lying in the snow. It's a trap, I said. That thing is trying to lure us out. I'm not leaving someone to die because you believe in ghost stories, Rodriguez said. He shook off my hand and headed for the door. At least take backup, Chen said. I'll go with you. They grabbed their weapons and heavy coats. Stay here with Martinez, Chen told me. Keep the radio on in case we need help. I watched through the window as their flashlight beams moved across the snow toward the voice. They were halfway there when I lost sight of them behind a stand of trees. The screaming stopped. For 5 minutes there was nothing but silence. Then Chen's voice crackled over the radio, distorted by static and terror. Unit 47, help us. Rodriguez is... Oh God, what is that thing? The radio went dead. Dr. Martinez and I waited by the window, straining to see into the darkness. Then I saw a flashlight beam moving back toward the cabin, but it was weaving back and forth, like whoever was carrying it was injured. Sarah? I called out. Is that you? The figure came closer, and I could see it was Chen. But something was wrong with the way she moved. Her shoulders were too wide, her arms too long. When she got close enough for me to see her face in the light from our window, I had to bite back a scream. Her mouth was covered in blood. Her teeth had grown longer, sharper, and her eyes were starting to glow that same yellow color I'd seen on the creature. Let me in, she said. But her voice sounded different, deeper, hungrier. I'm so cold out here. Where's Rodriguez? I asked through the door. She tilted her head like she was thinking. He's gone. The thing got him. Let me in before it comes back. But I could see pieces of cloth stuck between her teeth, pieces that looked like Rodriguez's jacket. I can't do that, Sarah, I said. She pressed her face against the window, leaving bloody smears on the glass. I'm so hungry, Jeremiah. So hungry it hurts. Just let me in for a minute. That's when I noticed my own mouth was watering. The smell of the blood, even through the glass, was making my stomach growl. Part of me wanted to open that door, wanted to join her outside in the snow. Dr. Martinez grabbed my arm. Don't listen to her, he whispered. That's not Chen anymore. The thing that used to be Sarah Chen howled in frustration and disappeared back into the woods, but I could still feel that horrible hunger growing inside me like a living thing trying to claw its way out. We were alone now, and I was starting to understand what had really happened to that drug operation. They hadn't killed each other. They'd been changed one by one, until only hunger remained. And now it was happening to us. By dawn, I could barely think straight. The hunger was like a fire in my belly, making me look at Dr. Martinez and think about how tender the meat would be on his arms. I caught myself licking my lips more than once. We have to get out of here, Martinez said. He looked as bad as I felt, pale, sweaty, and his hands were shaking. Whatever's happening to us, it's getting worse. I nodded and tried to focus. My military training was the only thing keeping me sane. There's an old Cherokee elder about 5 miles south, Joseph Crow Feather. If anyone knows how to stop this, it's him. We packed what we could carry and slipped out the back of the cabin. The snow was knee-deep, and every step was a struggle. But staying still was worse. When I stopped moving, all I could think about was meat. We'd gone maybe a mile when we found what was left of Agent Rodriguez. He'd been torn apart like a rag doll. But the worst part was that the pieces had been arranged in a neat pile, like someone was saving them for later. Bite marks covered every bone, and some of the larger pieces were missing entirely. "Jesus," Martinez whispered, then threw up in the snow. That's when I saw the tracks. Not the elongated human footprints from before, but something even worse. These tracks were huge, almost 3 feet long, with deep claw marks at the tips of each toe. Whatever had killed Rodriguez was bigger than the thing we'd seen at the cabin. "It's growing," I said. "The more it eats, the bigger it gets." Martinez wiped his mouth with a shaky hand. "How do we fight something like that?" Before I could answer, we heard that terrible howl again. But this time it was different, deeper, more powerful, and it was close. "Run," I said. We crashed through the underbrush like deer fleeing a wildfire. Behind us, I could hear heavy footsteps and the sound of branches breaking. Once I glanced back and saw something huge moving between the trees, all teeth and claws, and impossible height. The Tormented. Hunger was getting worse with every step. I started looking at Martinez differently, imagining how sweet his blood would taste. When he stumbled and fell, my first instinct wasn't to help him up. It was to jump on him while he was down. "Wolfsbane!" he screamed as I stood over him with my hands clenched into fists. "Fight it! You're stronger than this!" His words cut through the red haze in my mind. I stumbled backwards, horrified at what I'd almost done. "I'm sorry," I gasped. I can't control it." "Yes, you can," he said, getting back to his feet. "Your grandfather gave you that name for a reason, right? To repel the wolf." The Wendigo howled again, much closer now. Through the trees, I could see something massive coming toward us, 9 feet tall at least, with arms that reached almost to the ground. Its face was a nightmare of too many teeth and glowing yellow eyes. But the worst part was that I recognized it. The thing still had Chen's badge pinned to what was left of her uniform. "Sarah," I whispered. The Wendigo stopped about 20 feet away and tilted its head. When it spoke, I could still hear traces of Chen's voice mixed in with something much older and hungrier. "Join us, Jeremiah," it said. "The hunger doesn't have to hurt. Just give in and it all goes away." I could feel my resistance crumbling. The hunger was so strong now that my vision was turning red around the edges. All I had to do was take a step forward, and the pain would stop. That's when I remembered something else my grandfather used to say, about how the Wendigo curse could be broken, but only if you were willing to pay the price. "Martinez," I said through gritted teeth. "Do you have matches?" "What?" "Matches. Do you have any?" He fumbled in his pockets and pulled out a book of matches with shaking hands. "Why?" I grabbed them from him and started gathering dead branches, dry leaves, of anything that would burn. The Wendigo watched with those terrible glowing eyes, but it didn't try to stop me. "The old stories say fire can break the curse," I said. "But it has to be willing sacrifice. Someone has to choose to burn rather than feed." "You can't be serious." I struck a match and held it to the pile of kindling. The flames caught quickly in the dry winter air. "Tell people what happened here," I said. "Make sure they understand. The hunger can be stopped, but someone has to choose to stop it." The Wendigo let out a shriek of rage and rushed toward me. But I was already stepping into the flames. The fire hurt. God, how it hurt. But as the flames consumed me, I felt something else burning away too. The hunger. The craving for human flesh, the thing that had been trying to turn me into a monster. The Wendigo stopped just outside the fire circle, and I saw Chen's face flicker across its features one last time. For just a second, her eyes were human again. "Thank you," she whispered. Then the creature collapsed, and the yellow glow faded from its eyes. I don't know how I survived those flames. Maybe it was my grandfather's name protecting me, or maybe the Wendigo curse couldn't take hold of someone willing to die rather than feed. But when Martinez pulled me from the fire, I was burned but alive, and the hunger was gone. The official report said that a bear had attacked the drug operation. Agent Rodriguez died from animal mauling, and Detective Chen was listed as missing, presumed dead. The area was closed to the public for geological hazards, unstable cliffs and dangerous cave systems. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital with second and third degree burns. Dr. Martinez visited every day, and we never talked about what really happened in those woods. Some truths are too dangerous to speak out loud. But I noticed changes in myself. Not just the scars from the fire, but something deeper. I could sense things now, when someone was getting too hungry, too desperate, when the old anger was starting to take hold. After I healed up, I requested a transfer to a different part of the forest. But I still patrol the Red River Gorge once a month, watching for signs, looking for the telltale tracks in the snow, listening for howls that don't quite sound like wolves. Because the Wendigo curse didn't die with Chen. It's still out there, waiting in the hungry places, in the desperate times, waiting for someone to get so hungry they'll do anything to fill the emptiness inside. I've found 3 more sites over the years, places where the old starvation happened, where people crossed the line from human to something else. Each time I've managed to stop it before it spread, but each time it gets a little harder to resist the hunger myself. Joseph Crow Feather, the Cherokee elder. I never made it to that day, told me later that my grandfather had been right about my name, but he also told me something else, that once you've faced the Wendigo curse, you carry a piece of it with you forever. The hunger never completely goes away. It just waits. So if you're ever out in the deep woods during the hard winter months and you hear something howling in the darkness, don't go looking for it. And if you find yourself getting hungry, really hungry, in a way that normal food can't satisfy, get yourself to town as fast as you can. Because hunger can drive folks to things that change them forever, and some changes can't be undone. My name is Jeremiah Wolfsbane, and I've been watching the hungry places for 36 years now. I plan to keep watching until the day I die, or until the hunger finally wins.